Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Kartik. I'm one of the co-founders of ETH Global. I want to welcome all of you to the Compound Grant Summit. So you're watching all of this on ethglobal.tv. Just a quick reminder to everybody, this is a live streaming platform. So as our speakers come up, and if you have any questions or comments for any of our speakers today, you can sign in on the chat and ask those questions directly, and we'll be able to relay them to our speakers. Also, for everybody who joins in and signs in and engages with our speakers, we'll be giving out a NFT POAP for every participant, and those will be emailed to you next week. So this event is organized by ETH Global. And for those of you who don't know, ETH Global is an organization with a very simple mission. Our goal is to bring on thousands of developers into the Web3 ecosystem. And we do this primarily by running hackathons and summits. And ETHOnline is our biggest event of the year. So this event is a hackathon and a handful of summits. So for the hackathon, we were 1,100 developers and designers from 77 different countries participating in a 4-week event from 19 different time zones. There's so much creativity there. And we're also doing a lot of incredible summits, just highlighting everything that's going on in the Ethereum ecosystem. So we started off the event in our first summit on September 24th, where we talked about everything that's happening with NFTs and creators. Then on September 30th, we talked about the Aave ecosystem. Then last Friday on the 1st, we had our governance and DAO summit. And today is our Compound Grant Summit, where we're going to highlight all the incredible things happening with the Compound ecosystem. Tomorrow, we'll be doing our Developer Tool Summit, and next Friday is our final summit and closing of this event, where we're going to talk about all the amazing projects that came out of the hackathon, as well as what is happening with Ethereum 2. So let's get into today's agenda and the summit. So we're going to start off the day with Larry, Arrow, and Getty talking about what does it mean to work for the Compound protocol. And then Cole and Spencer are going to talk about the Compound dashboard, and they're going to show what they've been working on. Then we'll have Patrick talk about the account alerts he has worked on. And then we'll have Nick going into the details about how the Compound Treasury works. And we'll have Money Supply and John talking about how to manage risk for Compound. And we'll have Tori talk about the Compound open source interface. And then Jared talking about the Gateway project from the Compound team. And then we're going to end the day with an AMA with Robert Lesner, where we're going to source and ask a lot of questions from the community and ask them live with Robert. So let's get started. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome on our first speakers for today. And Larry, Arrow, and Getty are going to talk about what does it mean to work for the Compound protocol. So without further ado, let's welcome all three of them on stage, and welcome.
Thanks, Kartik. Is the floor ours now?
You're all good.
Sweet. I guess the first thing I'll say is thanks so much to the global crew. I mean, they made it so easy for us. All we have to do is show up and talk about Compound, which we're happy to do. I'm the Compound grants lead. My name is Larry Sakurnik. And just to give you guys a little bit of background on Compound grants before we dive right into the summit. But Compound grants is a community-funded and independent grants program that was really created by just a group of Compound fans. And so it's not related to the core team, and it was funded actually by the Treasury, which was we were one of the first grants programs to do that right after Uniswap. And really our focus is pretty simple. It's to fund really cool development happening on top of Compound. We've funded so far, over 30 different grants to many individuals, and we will continue funding many more for months to come. We're sort of on pause right now in terms of the grants program, as we're, we ran it for 6 months, and now we're in the process of thinking about how to scale it to make it bigger, faster, and even stronger than it was before. And so, you can find more about Compound grants at compoundgrants.org. Or you could go to Compound's Telegram or Discord to learn more about what the community is up to. But, we'll dive right in and just give you guys a taste for what it means to work for Compound. This panel I'm really excited about because, we all sort of are, and Getty and I, we all sort of met on the internet. So this is a very internet DeFi native panel. Getty are. Do you guys want to give a quick intro to yourselves?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Getty Hill. Um, Joined the compound community a long time ago. Back when I was with Grapefruit Trading, did trading for the last few years, and now I'm with GFX Labs in our project, and we do all sorts of fun things with compound, and I'm a huge compound advocate.
So R00 or Arrow, whichever you choose. I've been working with Compound for a long time now. I found Compound about mid 2019 to late 2019 and just was in awe of it. Like, everyone who comes into DeFi is like, wow, this is so cool. So I just looked at Compound. I was like, I want to know how this works, right? So I went down on read all the code. It was like incredible. Was on the Discord for months, and like initially before governance, not much to do, but then mid 2020 came and that was my time. And then since then I've been helping out on proposals through any way I can and, making impact in Compound.
I think one of the first things maybe we could chat about is like, what does it mean to work for Compound Protocol? I think a lot of people, they have, regular jobs working for companies, very standard recruiting process. And then they hear about people working for protocols, and it's kind of a weird thing to do. And it's not clear how to even get started. But can you kind of talk about like what you think it means to work for a protocol and how you even got started in the first place? I know you just mentioned a little bit, but like practically, what do people have to do to start working for Compound?
I'll go and say that, I sat in the community for a long time, long before there was like a compound token. So there wasn't like a big reason back then to get like super involved. It was just like chatting with the team, mostly onboarding users, giving feedback on like the product and like how Compound V1 worked, right? It wasn't really until like about a year and a little more than a year and a half ago now that like the comp token came out and that there was like this new incentive structure for community members to like participate and actually help like grow the protocol in a more active way than just relying on the core labs team back when they were kind of building their product that everyone's familiar with and using today. So I think in my mind, just having been around the protocol enough, you occasionally will ask yourself, well, why doesn't it have this feature? Why doesn't it have that feature? Why doesn't this thing work? Why isn't that thing there? And at least for me, the biggest impetus for my participation was wanting my first one was wanting the wrap Bitcoin collateral factor to be higher. And so like the Compound has these cool community autonomous proposals where instead of needing like the gigantic, well, today it's 65,000, but back then it was 100,000 comp to actually make a proposal, you could get like 100 comp instead. So I went bought my bag of 100 comp, like prior to this owned no comp, which was like a fair amount of money for me at the time. Bought my 100 bag of comp, went online, like learned how to make a cap, posted the cap up there, and then just started like pestering and messaging people being like, hey, like this is a good idea. Like wrote out the methodology on the forums and then just tried to keep sharing that with people until we got enough people on board to be like, oh, okay, this is a good idea. This can work. And then like made a lot of friends that way. And it kind of just snowballed from there. Yeah.
So for me, like if I'm going to start from the very beginning, I actually started out writing just articles on basically every proposal. I would go very deep into the diff changes and the reasoning behind yes and no, and trying to give people an unbiased opinion on how to vote, which would be very useful nowadays. It's kind of don't have enough time to do that anymore. But the community was very applauded that definitely. And as I was really well positioned. Question from the okay. I was very well positioned to start building things on my own and contributing things because I saw how everything was moving, and then I just got myself in and positioned myself to start contributing independently. I think that contributing to a DAO is very different than a normal job because a lot of self-guidance, and you really can contribute in any way. It's not like anyone's going to tell you like, no, you're not welcome here, right? Really, any DAO that exists nowadays just needs more people doing more things, and almost anyone can do something which is helpful to the DAO in some way and get paid for their work.
We looks like have a question from the audience. I'll read it out loud. There are a lot of DeFi lending protocols that do similar things. In your mind, what makes Compound different? What sets it apart from other DeFi protocols that make you enjoy working with it so much? Well, I can go first, and then curious what you guys think. I think generally that's the right positioning, which is a lot of the DeFi projects functionally, like product wise, kind of do similar things. I think culturally, though, is where they start to differ. And my sense is, and certainly what made Compound appeal to me personally is, the community, I would say, is way more conservative, I think, relative on the risk side in particular, relative to some of the other kind of cowboy DeFi projects. And, I think, if you want to build a project over many, many dozens of years and make it as successful as it can be over the long term, you have to think about risk deeply and think about the long term, as opposed to some projects that may be optimized for short-term gains at the expense of long-term thinking. And second, I would say, I think the website just looked really good, and the brand goodwill looked really good relative to some of the other projects, which are really, really confusing to use. Or Getty, what do you guys think?
Yeah, so I'm just right. I was started working with Compound really when it was the only one, right? Like mid 2019, late 2019, it was Compound and Aave was there, but very small. And then other than that, I don't think there was anyone else. And I really just enjoyed my time with Compound so much. I love the community, the Compound team, and right, like just I'm in a position where I'm really well positioned to contribute to the Compound protocol, and that's where my time is the most useful. Again, right, being conservative and thinking in the long term is really nice. You don't have a pop-up project which is just here and all of a sudden clone someone else's code or something. So that's nice. Right, Compound team and community is just really incredible.
Yeah, that's the big difference to me. I mean, I'm a fan of like pretty much all the main protocols, like Compound, Aave, MakerDAO, but Compound to me is the one that has the most embracing community. It's definitely like, if you're new to the community, even if you're just a regular user, it's a great feeling to join the Discord and ask a question and get like an immediate reply from a community member, or even like Robert, like chills out on Discord all the time. Like, that's a great feeling to know that like the whole team is like there and everyone's just trying to help everyone out and build a better product. I used to like be very interested in like MakerDAO. That was kind of like my first like big foray into like, I don't know, DeFi. And I think I chose MakerDAO at an awkward time because it was when the depegging was happening and DAI was at like 95 cents forever. And there was the purple paper and a lot of bureaucracy. So it was like, back in the day, there was only two options really, and Compound was the one that was most embracing and never left.
Yeah, and I think for folks who are not exactly sure what we mean by all this sort of stuff, like just go to the forums, right, and look at the sophistication of the discussions, and I think you'll find a really fleshed out, thoughtful community. And I look at some of the other forums, and everyone's trying to make a quick buck. This is, not the case for Compound, and I think that is appealing to a lot of people. I think one of the challenges a lot of projects, and certainly, Compound and Compound grants have, is knowing, as a contributor, you're sort of not sure what exactly you should work on and what's the highest priority thing for the protocol that you could be spending your time on in the next, few months. How do you guys think about, okay, here's what I'm going to work on over the next few months that is actually useful to the protocol and to the community?
If you're new to the protocol, and you have a decent understanding of DeFi, or at least just like familiar and used Compound before, I say go the selfish route and say, what do I want in the protocol that's not currently there? It's very likely that other people also want that thing that you would want, and then just start there and make it a passion project. And learn from there. If you join the protocol and you truly do not know what to do, but you want to get involved, then we have a list of requests for proposals on Compound grants. of ideas for people. Or of course, if you just join the Discord chat or the forum and say, hi, I have these skills and I want to help, we'll throw a lot of things at you and you can choose from the long list.
Yeah, so for me, it's generally a lot of just, I'd say, temperature checking, right? Like seeing what people have been talking about over the past few weeks in Discord, what people want, what comes up often. And there's a lot of things which are just things that people want that haven't been a priority. So like if I have free time, one of those few things would probably get on the agenda. It's very subjective, which is again, something which is specific to working for a DAO where you are essentially your own boss and you decide what you're going to work on. But based on community, like feel, you can figure out what is going to be important.
We can talk about the sexy stuff now, which is getting paid from Compound Protocol. And I think we have the right folks to talk about that because both Getty and R have been paid from the Treasury. And Getty in particular, I think you're the only sort of salaried employee, team member, contributor of the protocol, which is kind of cool. I think for a lot of people, it's a little bit awkward, right? People know exactly how much you're getting paid and it's all transparent. And can you kind of like walk us through what it means to get paid from Compound Protocol and how you personally feel about it? Maybe you don't like the transparency of it, maybe you do, but how should people think about working for a protocol and public compensation figures?
Yeah, so I'll preface it by that Compound for me is like a passion and something that I like enjoy. Like I have the comp I'm earning for the protocol for me is not in my mind a salary. None of that will probably ever get sold. It's just going towards my already position in the protocol. And when I got started in the protocol and started working on project, there was no grants program. So it was even more ambiguous at the time as to like how you actually got paid to do work. So I think for me personally, and from what I've learned over the last year about figuring out what the protocol does need and what's valuable to the protocol, it is a lot of, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that the protocol needs to be working on. And for me in particular at the time, it was like this Oracle problem. So for some of you might be familiar, if you've been in crypto for a while, which is probably most people watching the ETH Global stuff, you remember like the November 2020 DAI price happening on Compound, where the protocol functioned as expected, but because of how it was configured, it wasn't an ideal outcome. And that was like my call to action to like, okay, no one was fixing this for a few months. I'll figure this out. How am I going to get paid? Don't really know. And it was an extremely awkward process come like, all right, we did a lot of work here. A lot of value was provided. But how do I get paid? I think even today, it's like we're still in the very early days of like DAO. So it's like only a year and a half of Compound DAO. So everyone's still figuring it out. But at least today, there are the grants programs. If you are curious about trying to get paid, talking to Larry and myself, or other community members there, you can get a very good sense of like what compensation might look like, what milestones you can reach to get that compensation so that you're getting paid before the actual work's performed. In my case, like all the work was performed and then I asked to get paid, which makes it even more awkward. And then I guess the other half of that question is like, how is it to know that like everyone knows what I'm getting paid and that it's like a bit of like a political issue, like no matter which way you cut it, like the sense that everyone knows what the president gets paid in the United States and so on and so forth, and all like the public servants. For my particular grant, I think a lot of it right now is back pay for a lot of the work that was performed. That was kind of the preface it was submitted under, was like, I did 6 months worth of work here. That was a lot of work. Let's run it out for 6 months. And at that point, we'll revisit the topic and say like, hey, am I still contributing commensurate value to what is being rewarded to me in the community's eyes? Because it is all totally built on the Compound protocol. If the community were to say like, you know what, fuck this Getty guy, he's not doing a good job, they could just throw up a proposal, anyone could who had the votes, and they could just stop paying me whenever they wanted. So I'm very well incentivized right now to make sure I keep doing productive work for the protocol in the future if I want to keep earning that amount. So it's a really interesting set of incentives that is totally new. But if anyone ever has questions about this stuff, do reach out to me.
I know, or I should say, I suspect a lot of people watching this have worked in big tech or are currently working in big tech and are. I mean, you've worked in big tech too. How
For a
does it?
bit.
What's the for a bit, right? But what was that? What was the experience like working in big tech and then sort of going to Compound and working for the protocol? What are the things you like more about Compound, less potentially? Kind of walk people through that transition.
So big tech, right? You obviously depending on your position, but in general, you're given a task, right? And it's quite limited scope. You work on the same thing generally for a long period of time. Um, I guess Compound is about the polar opposite you can get, where your skill set is similar, but you're doing completely different things. And right, there's a lot more to what you should be doing, right? You're thinking, what should I be doing rather than actually doing, right? A lot of lobbying, a lot of, right, person to person skills, which you need to have to work for a DAO, at least at this current time, right? You have to be on the forums explaining your reasoning behind what you're doing, and then actually executing it, right? People aren't going to be holding your hands, and it's something where it requires a lot more independence and drive than working for a big tech company. I think for a lot of people, this is really good, right? Big tech is, well, right, you get paid nicely and your impact is limited, and it's quite easy to just get content at big tech. Working for DAOs keeps you on your feet, keeps you up to date on all the, newest tech, and you got to keep running.
And then I'm sure what everyone is thinking, what about compensation? If you're working for big tech, presumably you're still there because of the money. Do you think it's possible to make similar amounts of money working for DAOs, Compound, or even more amounts of money?
I think that all three of us know it is definitely possible to make more money working for DAOs than big tech. Definitely.
Substantially more.
I know we're running a little bit short on time, so one more question for you guys. But you've been working for Compound for a while now, right? I think you guys are probably some of the leading contributors for the protocol. Knowing what you know now after working for the protocol for probably years now, what sort of advice would you give to the newcomer or someone who's considering starting to work for Compound?
I can go first. I'd say for a newcomer, just like, don't be afraid to just, come onto the Discord and say who you are, say you want to help out. Like Compound, right, is on paper, such a large company, but we are very welcoming to new contributors. And like, if you want to get started, there's always going to be someone who's there to help you at the beginning and, tell you what tools we're using and be able to answer your questions. Even for me, there were people who are willing to answer my questions at every point when I was starting out. And there's always something to be done in the protocol. You just have to, not be afraid to get your feet wet, come into the Discord and, get started.
Yeah, I think that's well said. There will be times that you'll get discouraged because unlike a big tech company here, there is some extra like people skills that you need in order to succeed in that. You have to occasionally explain your stuff. But on the bright side, there's substantially more people who want to see developers and other community members and whatnot join the protocol and be productive contributors. And we're all willing to, I think, put a lot of resources into helping onboard those new community members who are going to help us build the protocol into being the best it can possibly be.
Awesome. And I would mirror that. I would say, if you're working for a large company, you're sort of like very much a cog in the machine, right? And no one or very few people, I think, like that feeling. Working for a protocol, it initially may seem like you could potentially be stuck doing some minor tasks that no one really notices, but anyone has the option and the ability to work on the thing to get each point that you want to see in the protocol and take it from, hey, I have this vision in my head, I think it's a little crazy, I'm not going to talk about it publicly, to all of a sudden working on it on the forums and making it a thing. I think that's a very powerful thing that many people who work for traditional companies may not be used to. Certainly, I had to get comfortable with that sort of power. Getty R, thank you so much, guys, for the time. I think we're running out. I'll hand it back to Kartik now.
Thank you so much, Larry, Getty, and Arrow. This was an amazing discussion. I think just maybe to summarize, I think the best thing about this thing is that I know you kind of implicitly implied, but like anybody can be part of this from any place in the world. And that to me is so exciting that you sort of now actually have a level playing field that you don't have to be sort of bound by a region or some certain prerequisites or a college degree or something to contribute. You actually are normalizing it to be skill-based and interest-based. So this is incredible, and Compound has been doing an amazing job with this. So thanks for that awesome discussion. And I think with that, we're ready to move on to our next talk.
Thank you, Kartik.
So next up, we have Cole and Spencer, who are going to talk about the Compound dashboard that they built as part of being a grant recipient. So we'll welcome both of them here on stage, and Cole and Spencer, whenever you're ready, feel free to get started. Welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you everyone for coming today, and really appreciate the invite to the talk today. We are going to be presenting some work that we did for the Compound Grants program called the Compound Dashboard, which is an analytics dashboard for the Compound protocol. You can actually go visit it now at compoundfinance.info if you want to check it out yourself. And what it is a dashboard for a holistic view of the Compound protocol itself and a deeper dive into analytics. So talk a little bit about ourselves. We are Paperclip Labs. We are an agency focused on building Web3 products. So we design, develop, and focus on user research and strategy. Our backgrounds are in the traditional tech world. And we kind of realized that there was an opportunity here for us to bring our skill set to the grants program. So my name is Cole, and joining me today is Spencer. You may have noticed our last names are the same. We are actually brothers, and we started Paperclip Labs about 6 months ago. Want to give a massive shout out to Larry, actually, for really kind of getting us started and kind of asking us every day when we were going to quit our jobs and come and do this full time. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we built and the learnings that we learned from what we actually built, what else we've done, and what we're hoping to do next as an agency focused in this space.
Yeah, so first what we built is an analytics website for the Compound protocol. Before we kind of get into what it is or kind of how we built it, I kind of want to say why we built it. So initially we were looking to invest in a stablecoin market in Compound, and we were interested in seeing the historical interest rates to see which market had performed the best over time. There wasn't really any data on this. I looked on the Compound website and a few other websites, couldn't really find anything. I messaged in the Compound Discord and said, is there currently a way to see historical market interest rates? The response was kind of not really. I looked at the Discord and also saw other people had mentioned this earlier in the weeks past. So we saw this as an opportunity to kind of create a product here to help people get more information about the Compound protocol. So for our MVP, we just built a really simple website, which showed the APY over time, taking data from the Compound API. Now, this is kind of where the project was going to stop. We kind of answered our question about what stablecoin we wanted to invest in. And, we shared this with the community, hoping it would help some other people as well. At the time, the Compound Grants was just forming. So actually, one of the community members who was helping out with the Compound Grants committee introduced us to Larry. We spoke with Larry about this, and he kind of convinced us to kind of pursue this further. So we applied for a grant to provide a website that would provide a holistic view of the Compound protocol data and provide users data that they wanted to see to make informed investment decisions. So this kind of brought us to the first stage of building this app out, which is the initial research.
So in the initial research phase, we had a list of ideas of what we could do for this dashboard. We knew that we needed to compare interest rates over time, but didn't really know what else the community might want. So we reached out to the community via the Discord and sent out a survey, just asking people, what do you actually want to see from an analytics dashboard? What's missing right now? And what can we build to hopefully fill that void? We got some really great results from this. And one of the bits of feedback that we received initially, we actually brought forward with us, and this is kind of our North Star that we used when designing and building out the first iteration of the product and any future sets moving forward. And that quote was, I think making sure that a community member sent to us was, I think making sure that every number on the page is meaningful, even to the most novice of users. This was really valuable and really kind of set the stage for the way that we built the product itself. We also wanted to ask what already exists out there. Were there other tools that could do this? What other tools are kind of the best in class solution? One of the platforms that we kind of referenced often is the Uniswap info dashboard. This is a really easy dashboard to use and gives you a great overall view of the protocol, as well as individual markets within Uniswap. So we kind of felt like this was a great opportunity for Compound to have something similar. When it came to how could we compare interest rates over time, we looked at a lot of different financial applications. And the one that we found that did a really great job from a user experience was Google Finance. There's a really neat feature in Google Finance that allows you to compare stocks prices over time. And we felt that we could bring that feature into the dashboard itself. So in this image here, you can see that we are comparing, at the bottom, there's a line item of little pills that you can click on, and you can compare different interest rates over time by selecting different timeframes.
So this is Compound Info. This is the protocol overview page. On this page, it has information and data about the Compound protocol as a whole. So you see things like supply and borrow, as well as reserves over time. A few key pieces of information, like how many unique users and utilization. And you'll notice throughout the application, there's these headings, like the utilization one. It has these small underlines underneath. Probably might be hard to see in this image. But as the user hovers over this, they get a tooltip that pops up. And it explains what utilization is, how it's calculated, and why it's useful. This is important that, no matter what caliber of users using this interface, they'll be able to learn about different things of the Compound protocol if they aren't already aware. Down below, there's a table of all the Compound markets. So here, there's a few key statistics. And if we go and click into the DAI market, we can get into the individual markets page. So the main piece of information here is that APY over time chart that Cole showed. So you can compare the supply and borrow API with and without the comp distribution of different assets over time. You also have some key statistics about the market. Again, all these headings are tooltips that the user can hover over to get more information if they're not sure what this piece of data is. And below, there's another chart which shows supply, borrow, and reserves over time for the individual asset. So kind of how it was built and the development stack behind this. The Compound API provides really good data about about the current market, but we weren't able to pull all the data in from there about historical interest rates and all the time series data to populate our charts. Actually, a community member from the Compound Discord reached out and introduced us to Flipside Crypto. Flipside is a data aggregator for the blockchain. They aggregate on-chain data into these tables that allow users to query them off-chain. So what we did is write SQL queries, and then a really powerful tool that they have is exporting these queries as an API. So we talked to the Flipside Crypto team, asked them if it was okay to use their application for data for hours. So they're kind of our backend for all the time series data. We use gas now for the gas information on the website, and then the Compound API for any of the current information, like market statistics. This all comes into our React application on the front end and gets displayed, and we use recharts for our plotting libraries. So once we released this to the community, we kind of put it out in the community Discord, DM'd a few members that were really active and just kind of wanted to get some feedback. Initially, everybody said, this is really cool. They find this really useful, but they wanted to see more. So this is one quote from a community member that says, "This is awesome. Do the interest rates include comp? Any way to get more information there as part of historical rates?" At the time, our APY chart didn't include the comp distribution. So we actually had this kind of in the pipeline. It was a feature that was coming, but so we implemented this. we were able to implement this pretty easily to toggle on and off the comp distribution for your assets. So essentially, there was a lot of requests similar to this one from community members. And we kind of got thinking, what other value can we bring to the table? What other things can we do? And what are our next steps here?
Yeah, so with regards to next steps, as Spencer mentioned, we reached out to the community again, this time with another survey, asking community members what they wanted to see, what additional things they wanted to see beyond the current version of the analytics dashboard that we had built. We received some really great feedback from the community members, and we ended up taking that feedback and compiling some feature sets that we were actually able to come back to the grants committee and apply for a second grant to continue building the dashboard itself. So we're currently actually working on the next version of the dashboard, and that we'll be slowly releasing some new features for that in the coming weeks. Today, we want to also talk about what we learned actually working for the grant committee or the Compound Grants program. So the first thing is that we learned working here is that the timelines are self-driven. As a grant recipient, you set the timeline as well as the milestones for your project. So it's really important that if you are thinking about doing a grant, you really our recommendation would be setting realistic timelines and milestones for you to hit and achieve so you can build that product and get that out. Another thing we learned is there's many ways to gather feedback. You don't have to just use the Discord channel. You can use things like Twitter, Reddit, DM community members, and even searching historical information in Discord. You can find some really great questions from community members about possible features that might be missing. Another thing we learned is that you prioritize the features. At the beginning, we mentioned this quote that we received from a user saying that that dashboard should be as easy for a novice user to use. When we got feedback from the community, we did have to think about making sure that the information that we're going to be displaying and new features that we might input into the dashboard meet that criteria of being easy to use. So we did have to kind of cut some community feedback. We felt in some cases there was some feedback that was maybe more of an advanced feature that you could probably find or build in a Do Analytics dashboard or some other dashboard. We felt that our analytics dashboard was really just focused on that core community or core novice user of the protocol and giving a pretty good understanding of what's going on within the protocol itself. And the last thing is that the community is amazing and awesome. We found that people are so willing to give you feedback and help you. As Spencer mentioned, a community member reaching out and introducing us to the Flipside team. So our biggest recommendation is if you are working on a grant or thinking about working for a grant, reach out to the community. You can get some really great feedback from them and learn a ton as well. So that was one of the grants that we did. We've actually worked on 2 other compound grants along the way, and we'll quickly just share with you some of the other grants we've worked on. So we had the opportunity to do help with the Compound Grants branding. We partnered with the Compound design team, and massive shout out to Jason on the design team for really supporting us throughout this experience. You can check out the Compound Grants branding on the Twitter pages or on the Compound Grants website. We also worked on a platform called Stake Signal, which is almost like a margin call tool for the Compound protocol. We worked on the branding, product design, and user research phases for this product. And actually, Patrick is going to be sharing in the next talk, so we won't talk too much more about this, but wanted to kind of share some of the other things we've been able to do. So what's next for us? So from the Compound Grants program and the work that we've done here, we've actually got some other projects, which has been really amazing for us as an agency to keep building. So most recently, we did the branding, logo, and website for the DeFi Education Fund. We've had some opportunities to work on some really cool projects in the NFT and gaming spaces, which we hopefully will be able to share in the future. As we worked in this industry as well, we've kind of realized there is a bit of a gap for contractors and freelancers with regards to kind of getting paid and getting set up. So we're currently thinking about working on our own project at the moment about how we could kind of make that transition easier for a freelancer, et cetera, coming into the space and how getting paid can work and manage. We're also always looking to work with grants as well. So if you do have any grants or are interested in working with us in the future, please feel free to reach out. You can send us a DM on Twitter, which is @papercliplabs, or you can check out our website, which will be posting some information about our some of our projects that we've worked on in the near future. So you can check that out as well. Again, thanks so much for having us today. I really hope that everyone has the opportunity and thinks about applying for the grant. We would highly recommend the Compound Grants program as a place to get started and build some cool products.
Amazing. Goal, Spencer, that was an incredible presentation, and this is such amazing work. We're getting a lot of great comments on the chat too about how impressed everybody is with the UI and all of your feature plans. I was going to ask you how people can get involved, but you already ended with that. So everybody check out paperclip.xyz, and this is amazing. Let us know how anybody else can contribute to this. This is great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. So with that, we are ready for our next demo and our next talk. And for that, I'd like to invite Patrick, who is going to be talking about account alert. So Patrick, welcome. Feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Hey guys, yeah, it's great to be here. Let me share my presentation and then I'll get started. Okay. Stake Signal. So this is a project that I built with Compound Grants DAO, as well as with Paperclip Labs, as they mentioned before. The really cool thing about how it all started was that Compound Grants and Larry actually got me in touch with Paperclip Labs. And because basically there was a skill set complement that they could provide. So part of, I think, what Grants does and the community does is even if your skill set is very particular, you can contribute a lot and you'll be sort of able to find people that complement your talents and that'll help you contribute to the DAO, even if you think I'm really good at doing X, well then X will be super helpful, and in a sort of decentralized way, we can get your skill set into interesting projects. So you can find my GitHub at CenturyApe, on Twitter as well, CenturyApe. I'm going to cover basically 5 topics today. First is just working for a DAO. And then I'll demo Stake Signal, and then I'll cover a couple topics just in terms of the code mechanics of interacting with Compound, getting data, building apps or dApps with Compound, and then a little bit of a roadmap for the future of Stake Signal. So the first thing about working for a DAO is you can choose your level of involvement quite a bit. So I'm still working my day job. And if you are working your day job, you can still hang out on Discord and you can get paid in crypto to do a real project. And it truly is that easy. You just need to be able to take the leap. And you get in there, you say, well, for me, like my strength is mainly in back end with like some front end. And like, let's say you need to have someone help you with design, or you need someone to help you with Solidity or something like that. You can find someone to help you. Or if you're good at Solidity, then you need someone who can do the front end or do integrations or something like that for you. That all exists, and this is sort of what Compound Grants exists to do, is to enable you to do cool projects. So Compound is a protocol that's handling billions of dollars, but for a protocol handling billions of dollars, it's really, you think how much work that entails. It requires a lot of work in a lot of fields. So whether you're a Solidity developer, a front end, back end, a designer, UI, UX, a data scientist, a hacker, test engineer, or if you're just good at project management, that's incredibly needed right now. And then if you're good at integrating with third-party tools, for example, Flipside Crypto, or for me, integrating with the SendGrid and Twilio for sending emails, sending text alerts, that is all work that needs to be done. And for me, really focusing on what I was good at and being able to hook up with Paperclip Labs to provide a lot of help on the design side was super helpful. And I think if you have something that you want to build, or if you want to look at the RFPs that are there, then you're going to find quite a lot of success working. And I highly encourage you to, to make the leap and to try. So how did Stake Signal get started? It was actually started with a tweet by Robert. Basically, we need someone to build a margin call system. And then how's it going? Well, now stakesignal.app is live, and you can go to the website right now, and you can also check it out and set up alerts via email right now. So Compound as a dApp, you can save money, you can borrow crypto, but it doesn't contact you in any sort of way. It's an entity sort of existing on the blockchain, but there are events. For example, when I started, basically the day I got my grant was in May, when the market was crashing and there were like tons of liquidation. So that was a day when Stake Signal was needed, but no project of that sort existed then. And then the day I got my grant, I started getting cracking on making it so that a website can react to events like price changes or health changes, and then send you a message. So that's sort of the need for Stake Signal. So I'm gonna share the app. So I'm gonna switch over for a second. Okay. So here's Stake Signal. Basically, you can connect your wallet with MetaMask. You log in. It shows you alerts. So here are all sorts of rules that you can set. I'm borrowing more than 70%, more than 65%. Email me when Aave is below a certain number, comp is above a certain number, sushi is above a certain number. And the way that Stake Signal is going to message you is it's only going to message you once per day. It's not going to spam you or anything like that. But you get in, you can create an alert. So you can set a price alert. For example, set a price target for ETH at $3,200, and then you can create the alert. So then we've got a new alert for ETH right down here at the bottom. Okay, so I'm gonna that's sort of what was built. Let me go back to the presentation. So basically, right now for Stake Signal, we've got email contact, and I want to sort of talk about getting started, basically, because for me, I was a developer only working in Web 2. I've never done, I haven't written or deployed a smart contract. I haven't done anything in Web 3 before, but it was really helpful for me that entry-level Ethereum is almost entirely in JavaScript, and much of the development experience and tooling is in JavaScript. And for building an app, there's so much stuff that you can do just using JavaScript or Python or whatever and you don't have to touch Solidity because there's tons of work that doesn't require actually getting into the guts of the smart contract. And decentralized protocols like Compound need a lot of talented developers and will pay for you to do interesting work in crypto. And for example, one super high priority right now is to maintain an open source and JavaScript front end and do other types of apps for the protocol. So just a quick note about sort of how Stake Signal was built. First of all, log in with MetaMask. So that's something that a lot of websites will be needing to use getting forward. I've included a link here, login with MetaMask demo. This is how I learned how to implement login with MetaMask for Stake Signal. So if you're looking to do something on your own, this is exactly what you can do to get started. It's got an example front-end app. It's got an example back-end app. And you can take what exists there and just turn it into your app. So the second part here is, sorry about that. So for logging with MetaMask, the important part here is the Web3 ETH personal sign, and you just have that in there. Your users will sign the message. It'll send the signature to the backend. Your backend. Your backend can check the message and then return a JWT to authenticate the user. Next, the working with data from Compound on the backend. So compound.js.api is super helpful. So how do I get health information back from Compound? Well, it's this request here. Require Compound Finance, compound.js, and then you just await Compound API account. And that will give you basically a list of addresses, all of their health statuses, things like that. So you can just pull this and get account health from compound.js.api and then use that data for your own app. And then the next one is how do you get prices and query on-chain data? There's public code that I have at my GitHub, Compound Oracle util. Basically, it's the same as interacting with any ETH smart contract using web3.js. You basically pass in the contract ABI, you pass in the contract address, and then you'll be able to grab read functions from the contract. Or if you're building a more advanced dApp, then you can actually interact with various contracts. So for example, with Compound, you can supply or take out loans or do something like that. And then here's just a laundry list of what I found was useful in building Stake Signal. Like this, as a developer, this is something you want to learn in terms of building something that interacts with Compound. So Compound.js, all the data from the protocol is there. Web3, so basically being able to interact with MetaMask and with Infura and other data sources and the blockchain. For login with MetaMask, check out the GitHub that I posted, but also this is how I implemented it with eth.sig util, Ethereum JS util, and JSON Web Token. For Stake Signals API was Node.js Express and JWT decode. For automation, for like JavaScript automation, I used Bull. And then for securing things like secret environment variables, I used .env. And then other useful tools to learn sort of as a blockchain developer, building apps, is use Infura for on-chain data, use Firebase to rapidly deploy and redeploy your app, and then Bull and Redis for your worker processes. So that's how I got the automation that drives Stake Signal in, is by learning Bull, by using it, managing the automated polling, the automated triggers, all that stuff. So it's super helpful in terms of building out an automated system. And then sort of a roadmap for where Stake Signal is going. So I don't have too much time left, but I'd like to conclude here. Text alerts is the next major thing. So I have the text alerts. I need to work out sort of all the things with subscribing, unsubscribing, things like that. I'd like to provide public data on protocol health. So basically have a downloadable CSV, just consume the data from my website, turn it into a CSV, provide it for the users. And then I think last but most important is the way stake signals originally envisioned with email and text, I think is not quite right. I think for crypto, lots of people value their privacy, and having a service that is consuming your email and your phone, even though for me, I'm encrypting everything. There's no way for somebody reading the database to get it or link the unencrypted email or phone to your account. I still think that a lot of people prefer to have a higher level of privacy. So I'd love to get suggestions, feedback, things like that on what sort of API I can build that will let people get secure, but also timely notifications on their account. And I think that's sort of like for the next year where I want to take Stake Signal. So yeah, thank you guys very much. And that is it. I highly recommend people work for Compound. Whatever you know how to do, there's a place for you. Super open community, and literally it's as easy as just log into Discord and say, what's up? I'm here to help. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Patrick. That was such a good presentation and just a cool utility. I mean, this is clearly something that Compound and so many other projects need to. I think you kind of brought up one interesting point, which I want to highlight for everybody watching. You don't necessarily need to know how to write smart contracts to be part of this. So much of what we're doing integrates and still works really well with the Web 2 world. So if you're a backend developer or front-end developer, you just understand how to work with APIs to do certain things, those are still valid options and utilities. And exactly what you're just building on is a perfect example of that. You can still tie this into how emails work and people still need this. So that shouldn't be a barrier to entry, and you've kind of proven that with that excellent product. So that's amazing. I was going to say, I think one obvious thing that you can think about is just having web workers in the background. So instead of running and tying into different services, you can just have web workers do a push notification directly. And it'll just be a cool one because then you can also offload the infrastructure on the client side. But that's awesome. But cool. So
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And we are ready to move on to our next presentation. So next up, we have Nick, and Nick's going to be talking about the Compound Treasury. So Nick, without further ado, welcome.
Hey guys, thank you for having me here. Let me go ahead and just share my screen. Right. Okay, awesome. I hope this is showing up okay. Cool. So I'm Nick. I am the partnerships lead for Compound Treasury, which is a product from Compound Labs. Give me 1 second. I might have shared the wrong one. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So today I'll be giving an overview of Compound Treasury. I want to start with just a little bit of Compound Protocol background, which I'm sure most people here are familiar with, but just kind of frame how we went from the Compound Protocol itself to the Treasury offering, and then dive into a little bit of the risks and considerations that a number of more traditional financial firms are thinking about when they want to participate in DeFi. So to kick it off, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Compound Protocol. Obviously, it's an open source interest rate marketplace for various Ethereum assets where anyone can come with their crypto. We've seen, I think, the most popular use case in Compound's lifetime has been these trading firms and hedge funds who are supplying volatile assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then borrowing stable assets like USDC, DAI, or Tether. And what that produces is this pretty high interest rate on stablecoins that's been integrated into a number of different applications, projects, exchanges, custodians, and has been pretty successful. The Compound Protocol itself will always remain open and freely accessible. And we're sort of building Treasury as a premium service on top. So under the hood, as most people are probably familiar, users are supplying assets into liquidity pools, unlike traditional lending where they're matching sort of various suppliers and borrowers based on shared terms. And the over-collateralization presents a new type of risk profile, I think, than most traditional investors are used to, since all borrowing is over-collateralized and the health of someone's principal essentially depends on the automatic liquidation mechanism. So that's sort of a key part. And when we talk to folks who aren't familiar with DeFi, is getting them comfortable with the fact that if someone borrows close to more than what they've supplied, that this open ecosystem of liquidators will come in and keep the protocol solvent. Interest rates are simply determined by supply and demand for borrowing of each asset in the pool. And this presents both benefits and drawbacks to different parties. People like the floating interest rate because they don't need to be matched on a fixed rate with a borrower. But there are other sort of financial firms who have a lot of interest in locking in a fixed rate so that they can more easily plan around future products or releases. A little bit on what the protocol has done so far. So there's been over 160 and probably at this point closer to $180 billion worth of assets supplied, probably closer to $60 billion worth of assets borrowed, over 300,000 active users. And a lot of crypto native institutions have integrated the protocol. Exchanges like Binance, OKX, OKCoin, projects like Ledger or Argent or Fireblocks have all integrated the protocol to launch different types of earn or save features. And so for the first 3 years or so of the protocol's existence, this was a major focus of the community, is how can we expand Compound's interest rate markets natively into these various different avenues for liquidity. Just a little bit more on our team. So we are Compound Labs, obviously. The team is distributed, was originally based in San Francisco. We built the protocol back in September of 2018, pioneered a lot of the concepts in DeFi, and we've now set up a new subsidiary, which is offering this Treasury product. So when we think about the transition from the Compound protocol to Compound Treasury, the genesis from it came from these existing financial firms who are interested in accessing the high rates in DeFi, but didn't want to deal with the operational complexity of converting their fiat into crypto, managing their private keys, paying for custody, and setting up all the kind of different service providers they would need in the backend to access these high rates that exist on stablecoins. So that was our impetus to build this Treasury product, which essentially seeks to create the lowest barrier to entry to accessing the benefits of the protocol. So with Treasury, we abstract away all of those complexities that I mentioned. We do all this in the back end and present users with a very simple experience for earning interest and supplying dollars rather than coming with crypto. We think over time, this will bring more institutions into DeFi, sort of starting with a limited offering. And then as they get more comfortable with the protocol mechanics and maybe other types of protocols on Ethereum and other chains, they'll want to dip their toes a little deeper. But with Treasury, we simply offer 4% on cash balances. We do all the conversions for our customers using different service providers like Fireblocks, who's our partner in this offering. And very simply, we take the variable interest rate that the protocol produces on USDC, and we guarantee this fixed rate of 4% back to the customer. And you can see a little bit of what that interface looks like. Should feel somewhat similar to the Compound app interface, but a lot of the complexities are abstracted away. This is a little more granularity on the terms of the offering. So we guarantee that 4% APR for 1 year. There's daily liquidity on positions with funding and withdrawals by wire transfer. We're currently only offering to US-based accredited institutions. So that's institutions with at least $5 million worth of net assets. But we expect to expand this offering over time to hopefully make it as easy as possible for anyone with traditional US dollars to get started with DeFi. So just walking through what it would look like to fund your Treasury account and get started earning. People would simply pull up wire instructions, send a wire from their bank. They can use an interface or the API to track their balance. There's also reporting tools that are a little more familiar to people who use Web 2 products today, rather than querying stuff on the blockchain directly. So they can simply export balance and activity history in a CSV. And then to withdraw, they simply click an amount that they want to send back to their bank that they originally registered with us. So it's a really simple flow for the customer. In the back end, the interest rates are powered by DeFi, but it's sort of combining these two worlds of fintech and decentralized finance. And this is a little more granularity on the flow of funds itself. So this is how we work with our partner Fireblocks and some banking providers, as well as Coinbase, who's doing the conversion. It's a pretty simple process of taking the dollars, converting them into USDC, supplying them the protocol to earn interest, and then custodying them on the Fireblocks platform. And the flow in reverse works exactly the same way. This is a little bit just on what we collect from potential customers. Treasury is only offered to these institutions where we're doing KYC and accredited investor verification, which is obviously very different than the Compound protocol, which is openly accessible to anyone with a Web3 wallet. A little bit on the risk considerations. As you can imagine, a number of financial institutions like banks and fintechs see the benefits of these higher interest rates and liquidity that DeFi provides, but they're very interested in digging into what does the risk profile of these products look like and how would they fit amongst the other sort of assets that we're holding or other yield strategies we have in traditional finance. So when we look at Treasury, what we try to point these people to is to understand the risks in the flow of funds. So how do you go from US dollars in a bank account into the actual yield-bearing asset CUSDC in Fireblocks custody? There obviously can be risks in the flow of funds to get there. There could potentially be custodial risks in how those CUSDC are being stored. And then there's counterparty risk in that you are now interacting with a business, which is Compound Prime, our entity, instead of a protocol directly. All these risks are very well mitigated with the secure flow of funds we've created. Fireblocks has best-in-class custody. So these risks, I think, are very well mitigated for these customers. And then on the protocol itself, there's a big sort of educational piece we do for these firms. There's sort of a difference between the actual risk on the protocol and the perceived risk. But the things that these financial institutions need to be aware of is any potential default risk. So would a borrower not be able to repay what they owe to the protocol, and suppliers would become insolvent, which has never happened thanks to a really efficient liquidation engine. Is there liquidity risk in that an entire market would be borrowed out and someone couldn't get their funds back in a timely manner? This also never really happens outside of when a market is less than $1 million. But in markets like USDC, with billions of dollars of supplied capital, there's typically always 20% of its total volume in open liquidity. And then lastly is any code security risk. So is there a way for someone to maliciously take user funds out of the pool? And we've mitigated this through a number of security audits and some great community members who consistently monitor the protocol. So that's pretty much it. I hope it was helpful to kind of see the evolution from the Compound protocol into this Treasury offering, how it may be appealing to more traditional financial firms who aren't ready yet to fully dip their toes into DeFi, but want to get started and understand the risks and benefits.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. That was a great overview of the Treasury product. One quick question. What has been the reaction for people who have tried this? This is clearly a much, much better offering than the alternative. So I'm just wondering how people have reacted to this.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few customers onboarded today. They all really enjoy the experience. They sort of see it as an educational tool, right? So they're earning, more than they would usually. They're also just getting more involved in the Compound ecosystem. We've seen them, kind of serve as like a gateway drug into DeFi, right? It's very simple to get started, but then you start learning more about the processes underneath, and we think it'll really just open up the floodgates to institutional capital in the space.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So hopefully we'll have a lot more people switching over, and we get to see more DeFi companies or just crypto companies use this as a treasury product. So thanks for that. And with that, we are ready to move on to our next talk. So next up, we have John and Winnie Supply talking about managing risk for Compound. So I'd like to welcome them both on screen and let them get started. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks to Don. So Mona, I think we start with quick intros. You want to go first? I can follow up there.
Yeah, I have been in the DeFi space for maybe about a year and a half. Previously, I worked in consumer lending and ABS at kind of like a boring fintech company, and then just fell in with MakerDAO and got really excited about that. I've been working kind of formally with the MakerDAO risk team for about a year, and trying to be helpful when I can with Compound and other lenders, kind of playing to my knowledge.
Cool. So I'm John. I'm COO at Gauntlet. Gauntlet is a financial modeling platform that uses battle-tested techniques from the algorithmic trading industry to inform on-chain protocol management. What this looks like is really sort of two things. One, we manage risk parameters for protocols like Aave, Compound, and others, as well as we also manage incentives for protocols like Sushi and a few others as well. So yeah, we use off-chain financial models to drive on-chain capital efficiency. And yeah, we recently, we've been working with Compound since 2019. And Nick on the last call mentioned our risk assessment that we published then. And yeah, and we'd actually just pushed a proposal through on Compound to sort of cement our relationship with them and continue to manage risk for the protocol going forward. We focus almost entirely on market risk, which is the risk posed to basically the use of volatile and occasionally illiquid assets as collateral on Compound. And but I think one thing we'll talk about today, both Monet and I, is sort of the different types of risks, and so just yeah, looking forward to getting into that. So I think one thing that's probably top of mind for everyone who's been following Compound over the past week, and I think is the bug that we saw last week. So, I think one thing we'll probably do is probably talk about that a little bit and then move on to some other risks and other risks in the protocol. Because besides just smart contract issues, hacks, exploits, whatever you want to call them, like lending and other protocols like Compound that use collateral do face other risks, and we can kind of get into that after. So I'm going to assume that people are a little bit familiar with the bug on Compound, but last week, for the people that weren't, a change was pushed to update some logic in the comp token distribution logic, and this actually created a miscalculation in how many comp rewards should be distributed to certain users, and doing so put close to $160 million of comp at risk. Since then, I think Robert mentioned yesterday that about $60 million of comp has been unaccounted for, though much of the comp was actually returned to the protocol by awesome users and members of the greater Compound community. One interesting thing that I guess happened this week is probably a kind of interesting thing to start talking about is there's actually been two proposals to fix the bug, one of which was actually canceled this morning, and the other of which is going to be executed in 2 days. I think Monet, I'd love to know sort of your thoughts about sort of some of the trade-offs that we saw with Proposal 63, and maybe we kind of start there and start talking about sort of the path forward to fixing this bug and the sort of tough decisions the protocol had to make with regards to trade-offs on risk versus growth.
Yeah, it's all trade-offs. So yeah, Proposal 63 was pushed out really quickly. Like props to the community members who got that out so quickly. It did face, there's like a standard 7 days worth of like delay periods and voting periods before any new changes can go through governance. So the sooner they got that out, the sooner we could kind of plug the hole, so to speak. But what it did is it basically just turned off the ability to claim comp just uniformly. So anyone who tried to claim comp, it would just, that transaction would fail, which would prevent any of the people who had like too much rewards allocated to them from being able to drain any more from compound. So it kind of stems the bleeding. One issue with that though is that certain integrators, not all of them, but I think some, they kind of like worked the comp claiming into their workflow where if compound turned off the ability to claim comp, it would interfere with their ability to kind of have their protocols work or have their projects work properly. So compound faced a difficult kind of trade-off between the risk of losing some more of those comp tokens that are still at risk in the comptroller, which even as we speak, I think there's a few tens of millions that could be claimed, versus kind of burning some of our key integrators who have taken it upon themselves to build on top of compound, and that's something that we the community obviously wants. That's a really important growth driver. So yeah, Proposal 63 was meant to kind of like quickly stem the bleeding, but it was kind of like decided to cancel it to not impact those integrators. And the hope is that either no more or not much more comp is going to be incorrectly claimed in the next day or two. And then Proposal 64, which is passed and is going to be executed shortly in like another day or two. That has like a more targeted fix where it just prevents claiming from just those users that would have potentially incorrect rewards issued to them. And it wouldn't end up kind of stepping on toes of the integrators. So yeah, there's like, it's kind of almost like a business risk. Like what could compound lose in the long run of being like unreliable to build on top of? And is that worth more than maybe the comp tokens that we might lose right now if people incorrectly claim them? I personally was kind of surprised, that the trade-off kind of fell that way. I think it's easier to see like, a specific amount of money at risk and say, okay, we're going to go for that. But I could also see that it makes sense to like be just relentlessly kind of user focused and be willing to take a little bit of an L to make sure that we're doing right by our users.
Yeah, I think it definitely is a tough decision for the protocol. I think, from the three integrators I talked to, which were Yearn, Idle, and OUSD, it seemed like actually only Idle was going to be like truly negatively impacted in a way where they couldn't actually push a fix that would actually mitigate any of the issues posed by Proposal 63. I think it's a thing where I think in any normal organization, you'd have someone who is managing these integrated relationships and, helping set expectations, even maybe like doing technical reviews, being like, hey, these integrations are reliant on, functionality like claiming comp rewards. And that makes them like very brittle to literally any functionality in the protocol changing or being deprecated. And so I think that, that's actually an interesting thing to sort of think about is like, it would be normally really weird for a company to continue to put $40 million at risk for an integration that has driven much, much less than that of value to the protocol. However, like it's hard to manage these relationships when, you know, all you're doing is reaching out when something goes wrong. So I think it's an interesting thing to see how protocols in the future will kind of invest in managing relationships so that in the case there were some issue or they need to make changes, et cetera, to be in a position to work with integrators to sort of help figure that out. I think it's just incredibly unlikely that the impact on integrators from Proposal 63 is anywhere near close to $40 million in value. Now, it's also very unclear the chances of this comp being claimed, right? Anyone who could have claimed comp in the window between 63 and 64 could have also done so for whatever the past week. And so I think that there is some very tough calculus there. But, you know, I think that a lot of the integrators were understandably complaining about, hey, like, well, this is going to break us. And like, I think, hey, everyone empathizes. I know, you know, at Gauntlet, we depend on so many different API endpoints, service providers, et cetera. We have to deal with this stuff all the time. But I do feel like there was times where I felt like people were maybe less than understanding for, you know, this is a solemn event for the Compound community and Compound protocol and its users. And it's the worst thing that's ever happened to Compound unequivocally. And after like the worst week of your life, like I would kind of hope that integrators and partners that are deriving tons of value from your protocol might be a little more understanding about some of these issues. And I think a lot of people, you know, tried to be, but, you know, of course, wanted to vocally speak out, trying to say like, hey, like, let's try to figure out a way that we can not break these integrations, et cetera. But yeah, you know, I think it's a learning experience for the community and hopefully something that other DeFi protocols will be able to continue to learn from.
Yeah, I think you could kind of say that it's like a really unexplored area of risk is like kind of like the business development and sort of more of like the integrations and like, yeah, it's like a risk to your business, even though it's not like strictly falling in like risk management frameworks or like something that Gauntlet or maybe, you know, myself, we would have kind of the most like focus on in a normal sense. So I think it's definitely been like a big eye-opening experience.
Yeah, you know, I noticed actually if anyone has read Rune from Maker's recent post, I think he mentioned actually some statistics around the amount of I think CDPs are not what they're called anymore, but the amount of collateral in Maker that actually comes from either like kind of CeFi on-ramps or other like large integrations, right? I think it's actually maybe like half of the ETH uses collateral in MakerDAO all comes from a couple large positions. So Monet, do you have any more context on that? And maybe you could like shed some light or color there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few CeFi protocols that bring like really huge volume. I think like Nexo is one of them that's kind of publicly known, and they bring like well over $500 million of loan volume. There's some sort of like, they might be CeFi platforms or they might just be like mega DeFi whales. Like there's a set of like a few like large ETH CDPs that account for a lot of the like expansion during when ETH price goes up, and then they kind of like unlever when it goes back down. So yeah, it's extremely concentrated. And at Maker, we're only just kind of beginning to sort of see if we can handle these relationships a little bit more hands-on. You know, like I think there's people ideating of like, can we see if we can like reduce our risk and offer also kind of more attractive terms to certain sort of like institutional grade users, if they can prove that their risk profile is lower than just like, you know, Joe Schmo off the street. So I think we're mainly approaching it from like the perspective of like, if we can kind of verify that their DevOps and just like their general risk posture is good enough that we can make a better offer. But I think there's another element where, if we're not really meeting their needs, or if we had a situation similar to this and our response was causing them a lot of problems, that'd be a huge hit to die. A lot of our DAI from ETH is from a really small number of users.
Yeah, so I think like given that, I guess, market structure or the Pareto-esque distribution of users, like these sort of like business development risks, or I'm not sure how you put it. I think these things will be an interesting thing kind of going forward in a lot of DeFi protocols, where trying to figure out how to be the best, for instance, in Compound's case, lending platform to integrate with and things like that. These are things that could, really drive a ton of growth. And I think it's that potential growth is what probably drove the Compound community to, really try to really risk a lot to avoid breaking some of these integrations. And I think, I don't envy, everyone else here and who has to white knuckle this and really just hope no more money is removed from the protocol next few days. But, I think right now, everyone's been just scouring Etherscan addresses, trying to figure out, if people are going to claim, et cetera. And I'm really hoping we got to a place of high confidence here that this is the right path forward. And I think it shows how important these business relationships are. Maybe we can move on to other sorts of risks. But I think one thing, that any collateral-based system has to reconcile is basically loan to values, or in Compound's case, they call them collateral factors. These are actually some of the parameters that Gauntlet sets for Compound, as well as Aave and a few others. I think, Monet, you've really thought about a lot of these risks in the, coming from the MakerDAO. I'd love to kind of know a little bit like, how does, maybe Maker set some of these parameters, and what does that look like? And then maybe we can, provide a perspective from how this works in Aave and Compound, where Gauntlet manages these parameters.
Yeah. There's kind of a couple key factors that we look at. And, primarily like we're trying to suss out, like, in a reasonably worst case scenario, how much the value could go down for some of these loans, and whether we can get them all liquidated without some of them going like under collateralized and basically like bankrupt positions. It can be really tough to do that accurately because, you're really trying to like guesstimate how much something could drop without necessarily a lot of like historical records to go by. So I think it's pretty typical. Like you'll look at the depth in, order books and liquidity pools to see, okay, if, we needed to liquidate X value of position, how much slippage would it cost? And, if it's causing like 50% slippage, then, you'd probably need to set a very low collateral factor just to make sure that you're still, if you flip all that collateral and dump it on the market, you still wouldn't be bankrupt. You also look at volume, which is kind of indicative of like people's willingness to buy a collateral asset. So that's another factor. Volatility, and then also kind of like historical like max drawdowns. I think in a way, like the day-to-day volatility of like if something's going up 5 or 10% a day and then down, like those aren't the sort of situations that are going to cause real problems. You really want to like think of, okay, what are the real kind of market break situations where a collateral asset falls like 30% in a day, or 50%, or like 65% intraday, like it did on March 12th last year. So yeah, basically taking a lot of different kind of data points into account. A lot of them are shifting pretty quickly, like volumes and liquidity depth can expand a lot and then kind of draw down a lot, just depending on market sentiment. What I would say for Maker though is I think we have a bit simpler or maybe easier of a job of risk management versus somebody like Compound or Aave, because everyone who's doing business with Maker, they're short USD. They're all borrowing or minting, in our case, DAI, which is USD. So we only need to consider each asset's sort of like volatility with respect to that one other asset that they're shorting. Somebody like, a protocol like Compound, you can, I would say most people are, borrowing dollars. That's kind of the most popular trade, but you could go long ETH and short Bitcoin, or you could, go long USD and then short any of the other collateral assets on Compound. So it's pretty daunting, to be honest. You have to kind of like consider any of these individual positions that people either do have or could have, and make sure that the sort of inter-asset liquidity and volatility is not going to break you. So yeah, I think it kind of gets that like one layer deeper of complexity with the money market protocols.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing though, like maybe like depending on, at what time point you look at, Compound and Aave have like maybe 60 to 85% of their borrow also in USD. So it's at this point, just because the borrow usage on the more volatile assets is just lower, some of the risks do look pretty similar from that perspective. But I can talk a little bit about how Gauntlet models risk for protocols like Compound and Aave. I think one thing to shout out here is, we have a risk dashboard for Aave that we launched a couple of weeks ago. We're launching one for Compound soon that just gives users, community members, token holders a way to kind of look into like statistics, like the current value at risk of the protocol, current parameter settings, etc. If you go to gov.gauntlet.network/Aave, you can see the Aave risk dashboard. But behind the scenes, behind all these numbers that we publish, we actually focus on stochastic simulations that help us predict protocol behavior in the case of these really large drawdowns. So what we do is kind of a multi-step process. The first step is we use historical market data to train correlated price trajectories, so that we can simulate different outcomes. We actually try to tune our simulations to like the March 12th levels of volatility. And so we basically then from these price trajectories use agents that do things like open up positions on Compound, take out borrows, as well as liquidators. And so as these simulations progress, we actually just spin up like thousands and thousands of Geth nodes and just run the Compound contracts with agents, like, using Web3 APIs to call the Compound contracts and like simulate out these sort of like doomsday scenarios. And we take into consideration like the distribution of borrow, distribution of collateral, distribution of lent assets that currently exist on the protocol, and basically configure a simulation that looks as much like the current state of Compound as possible. And then by running thousands of these simulations, we start to get estimates for basically, hey, in the case of a March 12th type scenario, what are the how many times out of 1,000 does the protocol potentially suffer an insolvency event and things like that. And so as I mentioned in the call, like these agent-based stochastic simulations, these are things that come directly from a lot of the people with Gauntlet's experience from high frequency trading, where these agent-based simulations are also used to back test HFT strategies. And so one thing like is I talked about VAR, and I think VAR is something that I actually worked at Goldman Sachs in 2008, and I didn't really have the highest opinion of VAR, considering when I worked there, we got like bailed out by the government and Warren Buffett because of basically VAR underestimating the actual value at risk in sort of the more general sense in the protocol, or sorry, in the company. When you look at protocols like Compound, though, what we do is we explicitly model these liquidation spirals. As I mentioned, we have liquidators. And when those liquidators sell collateral that has like fallen under the liquidation threshold, we're actually, simulating like price impact off of slippage models that have been like trained against real world order book data. And so this allows us to get like some pretty interesting data around these sort of tail risk scenarios where we can kind of with a lot more confidence understand sort of these runaway risks that exist in these protocols. And so I think, we're always trying to improve our models and things like that as well. We're always shipping new updates, but that's just kind of a little bit how we think about risk in these protocols.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend for everyone to check out the Aave, Gauntlet's Aave risk dashboard. I'm pretty hyped on it. It's pretty awesome. I guess, do you think of any like, one thing that I've felt, from time to time is that Compound and Aave as well, they kind of have like sort of like limited tools at their disposal. I come from mainly working with MakerDAO, and they have a couple features. Like most important is maybe debt ceilings, where we can say, a maximum amount that we're willing to lend against a particular collateral. So, for something like Wrap Bitcoin, we might say, okay, we're only willing to lend 300 million or 400 million, which is like, about 5% of our portfolio. So then if, BitGo gets hacked or some sort of like out of scope tail risk event happens and it all goes to zero, we theoretically could still kind of dig ourselves out of it. And Compound and Aave, as they're built right now, they don't have like a direct correlation to that. So I think that's interesting. I think there's kind of like opportunity there for strengthening the protocol with adding a couple more like levers for risk managers like Gauntlet to be able to like pull on to keep stuff in line.
Yeah, levers are an interesting thing to bring up. I think, right now, everything in Compound takes 7 days. And I think over the past 7 days, we've kind of realized that there are probably some things that we'd want to do quicker. And so I think like over time, it's going to be important for protocols to figure out how to delegate responsibility and power to people that can use that to help drive value to the protocol. I think, one example is like maybe last week, having some way for people to roll back recent changes on a shorter time frame than 7 days would have been something really valuable. I think another thing to be really valuable is giving someone control using off-chain logic over things like the reserve factor. And so, because I actually think that if you're going to do something like set a limit to usage in a protocol like Compound or Aave, you end up making it really difficult to set an interest rate curve that guarantees kind of liquidity and also set rewards and comp in a way that's going to just kind of work over the long run. I think one example of this is the comp market in Compound. Right now is like completely maxed out, and the comp rewards in that market are actually like greater than the borrowing cost. So it creates all sorts of weird issues there. I think I would really like to do things like, instead of actually just setting hard limits, like I'd rather let market factors determine the actual amount. And so I think what this would look like is the protocol would vote on some amount of, WBTC that they were comfortable having in the protocol. And basically, as you approach this number, the reserve factor goes up and up and up and up and up, so that you actually hit a market you manage the market to an equilibrium based off fees that would allow the protocol to basically manage exposure without setting an artificial limit, which I think is probably the best way to actually capture value in these markets without as opposed to your options to manage risk here, where you're just setting a hard limit. I don't know, Monet, you guys thought about that kind of stuff or anything like that before?
I think that's a really good point. And yeah, I mean, the market is your friend. Like, you want to kind of let it set equilibriums as long as they're safe. I think limits can be useful because, I think wrap Bitcoin is a great example where there's always that, however small chance that like it just pulls them out Gox or whatever and just completely rugs. And then that would be a huge problem. And, you can't say exactly how quickly, oracles would be able to reflect the new value being lower. And you might have some value that ends up getting kind of like exfiltrated out of the protocol. So I think there's some ways where like some hard limits, maybe kind of like higher than you're likely to hit would still be useful. But yeah, I think there's probably a lot more that can be done just to like craft these market equilibriums into like kind of like safer zones.
Cool. I think we're just about at time. I think, some interesting points raised, Monet, around, different sort of risks protocols have to manage going forward. I think smart contract risk is always one that's been top of mind since, I don't know, like the DAO hack. But yeah, I think like this sort of business development risk and these other market risks that we talked about, as well as, the risk posed by centralized assets, are all things that protocols like Compound and others will have to manage going forward. I think it's actually always kind of funny that people, like, I remember like people view the DAO as some terrible failure, but it's now crazy how many DAOs there are in the space. It truly was a canary in the coal mine. But yeah, looking forward to see how these protocols continue to deal with these risks and balance the trade-offs between risk and growth. Because I think any protocol that's too risk averse is going to completely limit their growth. And so I think it's really interesting to see how protocols take different approaches here and what the market looks like going forward.
Yeah, the risk of becoming irrelevant.
John, Monet, this was a great discussion. Thanks for kind of facilitating this and talking about everything that's happening with risk. Obviously, not a simple topic, but for those of who are interested, what is kind of the best way to get involved in this discussion for the Compound ecosystem?
Comp.xyz. Anyone can post in the forums, I think we're both pretty active there, as well as lots of other people who've thought about this just as much as we have. So looking forward to talking to people there.
Yep, and the Compound Discord. If you have like questions, I think that's a great place to get them answered as well.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much. And with that, we are ready to move on to our next talk. So next up, we have Tori, who's going to talk about the open source interface for Compound. So whenever you're ready, feel free to get started and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Karthik. So my name is Tori. I'm going to be giving a talk today related to Compound's open source interface. This is a repo that we recently made open source in the last, let's say, month, and we kind of refer to it as Palisade. And so the purposes of this talk is to kind of just give a quick overview for the developers that are interested in actually, making changes to the open source repo. This is the app that's deployed at app.compound.finance. So let me share my screen here. Cool. And then to just give a little bit of a quick intro on myself. So I've been at Compound since the very beginning. I'm actually the first employee at the company. And right now, my current focus within Compound is sort of leading the application development. So this entails all the different Compound web front-end properties, including the dApp, the gateway front end, the application that lives at compound.finance, as well as some of the new interesting product we're building around Compound Treasury. So like I said, the agenda for this one is to just give a high-level overview of Palisade. So Palisade is the code name that we use for the application that's deployed at app.compound.finance. It's been previously closed source, and it's kind of one of the last remaining closed source code sources that we had for the applications. We're really excited that we've actually been able to get it into a state where we can open source it to the community and add, have people in the community be able to make code changes on top of it. And also just, watch some of the changes that are being made from our team specifically around, new changes that are coming to the front end. And so with that, I'm going to switch to my screen share. I'm going to switch to my repo here. So the repo itself lives at Palisade. There's a link on my slide that kind of shows you all the source code again for this project is actually was deployed to app.compound.finance. And to just give you a little quick overview of the code base, one of the things that developers need to figure out as they, check out and clone the code base before they can run it is the code actually needs a little bit of configuration. So out of the box, trying to run the code won't actually work because we actually need to create a configuration file that tells the application, what are the different networks that are supported, what are the compound APIs that provide it for things like gathering interest rate. In terms of data providers, we need to actually query Web3 to gather all the information to display in the DApp, as well as kind of displaying information related to what sort of networks are available and supported by the application. Now, one interesting thing about the configuration file is you can see all of these are ETH specific networking configs. There's no reason why we actually can't configure the Web3 front end to support other networks or Ethereum-like networks like Polygon. In fact, we at Compound ourselves actually have a version of the application running that supports the Mumbai testnet. So that's kind of an interesting little tidbit for developers that are interested in possibly trying to reuse parts of the Compound Palisade app to get something running on Polygon just for testing. So again, the application is going to require setup for some of the configuration. There's a quick description of all of the different keys that are required. And then I'm just going to jump into the get started to actually get the application running to do a little live demo here. So I have my terminal window here. I'm not going to install the dependencies because that takes a while, but we kind of have three main scripts that required for the application to function correctly. And the way that I like to do this is open a terminal window, go to my repo directory, open up 3 additional windows in the terminal, and then just run each of these commands one at a time. So yarn watch I18N is the first one. Let's spell it correctly. The next one is yarn CSS, watch CSS. And then the last one is yarn start. Right, and so I'll go back and quickly explain what each of these scripts are doing here in just a second. But we can see this is the application that we know and love. This is actually the application that's deployed at app.compound.finance. Right now, this is running locally at localhost port 3000, but it should give you the exact same application experience as if you were running it or accessing it from IPFS or app.compound.finance. So that's basically how easy it is to get the application running. What I want to do now is do a quick explanation of the script calls. So the first one, watching I18N. So the DApp Web3 front end supports different languages, and the different languages are specified in different strings files in the source code. So if I bring the source code window up here, I open the source directory, there's a strings directory, and you can see inside the strings directory all the different strings that are actually configured in all the different languages. So this is how the Compound manages different strings for the various pages on the app. So for instance, if I wanted to come into the application, look up the borrow balance, maybe change that for the purposes of the demo. I can do a search for borrow balance here, and then maybe, because I'm feeling cheeky, add in a little demo, text string here. So the watcher string actually continues watching all these files and automatically rebuilds the app. So you can see on this borrow balance string usage, hey, we kind of got a demo update. The next command that is being run is the watch CSS. So the Palisade app uses CSS to define all the styles in the application. And there is a CSS directory, SCSS directory here that has all the different styles that are being described. So if I wanted to come into the application and let's say inspect this background, maybe I want to do a change of maybe this black background here. I can go into the content. I can find the HTML section tag that has class hero. One of the ways that I can do this is search for the class.hero on my SAS files. I found it here. Right now, the color is dark, variable that's configured, but there's no reason that I can come into the code base and kind of change it to maybe something that looks blue, right? And again, because the watch CSS script is running, or sorry, this is green, we can actually see that this updates on the code base directly. So that's kind of cool. The next thing that I wanted to show you is this application is all built in a programming language called Elm, and we chose Elm because our team at Compound Labs is a big fan of functional programming languages, and Elm is a functional, pure programming language. We found that the language being able to force our own developers to handle all the different edge cases for any features that we build is actually quite powerful. Typically we say internally that, with a high confidence factor, when Elm compiles, it kind of just works. And that's kind of been really stellar for, making sure our team can continue to move fast with just a couple of members on the team. So within Elm, I advise any developer that wants to, fork the repo and look at it, go through the Elm documentation to kind of see how things work under the hood. I don't have a lot of time on this one, so what I want to show you next is sort of how we use the Elm code to call into a Web3 call, which the Web3 calls are written in JavaScript. So in my main class, I'm going to search for a method called new block. Command. And within the context of the Elm code base, this new block command basically is invoked whenever a new block happens on the Ethereum chain. I think this is roughly every 13 seconds. And there's a lot of information here to go through in the code base. Basically, high level is for every page that it exists and every different component, things like transactions, things like compound balances, things like Oracle prices. This function basically passes off information to these sub modules, and the sub modules themselves actually figure out what are the necessary data pieces that we need. And this module needs customer balances, it needs account limits, it has metadata. I can go to the definition of this account limits, and there's a port here. Again, on the Elm system, a port is a way to communicate from the Elm layer onto the Web3 layer. If I do a search on my ports class here on the code base and do a search for this method, you can see on my JavaScript ports class, I have this function called subscribe with a data payload that exactly matches the one that I was showing you earlier in this Elm class. So they kind of match one-to-one. In this particular call, we make a call to account limits. And this kind of should look a little bit similar to some of the developers that are already familiar with doing Web3 calls. Here's a specific call that calls in to a function on the Compound Lens contract called account limits. It queries for account limits with the function parameters, controller address and customer address. And then if I pull in the Compound protocol, I can actually show you on the Solidity layer, the Compound Lens contract. Here's the function that's kind of being invoked. Here's the struct that's being returned, and I can come back to Palisade and say, okay, as a result, here's the struct for this particular call that's being made. Now, if I want to make a change here, I could come in and say, the controller contract also has, or the lens contract also has a function for something like let's see, max assets. Here, I'm going to do a controller with max assets. So this is a call, like if I wanted to add in a additional call to Web3 to track information, I can log this new variable, and I can track it here. Max assets. Should refresh my page again, and I'm going to go into the console, and then we can see, oh, there's 20 max assets right now that are supported on Compound. Now, the last thing that I want to show you, I have this app that I have, console log, a styling change. The Palisade application also supports being able to deploy all of my changes to IPFS, which is kind of the default environment that we use to deploy any changes from ourselves that we make, as well as G-Cloud. So the scripts in here, if you follow the instructions, allow you to set an IPFS port, a host. You can add in the necessarily API keys that you need, run the IPFS script, and then get the version of this application that I have locally with the green background, deploy it onto IPFS, and then see how that kind of works out for your specific customers, either for demoing purposes or, if you actually want to make a change, a fork, and make a change to the Compound protocol and actually push it live into production, that should work out just fine. Here, I actually might be able to run this here. I have a tiny bit of time remaining. We'll build a CSS first. I'll do the build of the application, and the build basically is creating a directory of all these, SAS CSS files, all the bills, all the JavaScript files, all the HTML contained in a nice package, with the idea that you would kind of push this directly to, any of your desired static page hosting website. So this is building, and before I kind of finish out here, I just wanted to make a little shout out that, my team at Compound do a lot of, watching the different questions that the community has, and specifically for questions around the Compound Palisade repo, I would hit up the Compound Discord chat. That's kind of the best resource for developers if they want to, get questions, talk to some of us directly, ask any questions that you have about how the repo is structured, and just generally get help for any ideas or projects and questions that you have that you want to work on. So I'm going to deploy this. It should be able to deploy here really quickly. Cool. So this actually deployed my local changes to IPFS. And I'm going to grab one of these links, open it up in my browser. And if everything, I missed a number. If everything worked out good, I should see a nice Compound application with sort of a green background. Let's see if it loads. The first time you deploy to IPFS, it's a little slow, but there we go. We have a version that exists on Compound that contains the code changes that I just made, green background and all. That's about all the time that I have to describe. Again, went through a lot of information really fast. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out into the Discord. But thank you all for letting me have this presentation with you this morning.
Thank you so much, Tori. I was worried about Murphy's Law kicking in, but then I realized you guys use Elm. So
there you go. When it compiles, it kind of just works.
Awesome. One question before we move on to our next talk. What is kind of the process around people wanting to contribute to this repo? Obviously, this is the production Compound app. So can anybody contribute? What are the prerequisites? How do you think about that? And how do you welcome community edits?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the Compound repo, there is a specific README for the contributing, for developers that want to contribute. The easiest answer is to just fork the repo, get familiar with making changes to it. After you fork the repo, you can create a pull request back to the main Palisade repo, and then our team will go through it and review it and make sure the changes seem to be okay and safe and valid. And then any PR request that is merged into the mainline repo, that automatically gets deployed to IPFS. And then if that change kind of looks good on the IPFS side, our team at Compound Labs, at least for right now, can go ahead and make that accessible at app.compound.finance. So again, I would take a read into the contributing guide to go get all the steps to figure out how to create the pull requests, how to create issues on the PR, and how to kind of get help and feedback on any changes that you want to make.
Awesome. Well, hope that was helpful for everybody too. This was an amazing demo, and thanks for talking about how everything is architected.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we are ready to move on to our next talk, and our next speaker is Jared, and Jared's going to be talking about Gateway. So I'm super excited about this thing, but I'll let him tell us everything about Gateway. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen here. Let me know if you can see it. Hopefully you can see it. But yeah. Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. My name is Jared. And just a little bit about myself. So I've been at Compound for about 2.5 years. Pretty much starting work, designing and working on the V2 protocol, which is we now know as the Compound protocol. And today I want to talk about Gateway. So Gateway is Compound's blockchain project that we started last year. And yeah, I just hoping to sort of explain what it is, why we're building it, and give you a little bit deeper understanding maybe how it works and sort of what like the current status is and things like that. So yeah, jumping right in. I guess the why are we building Gateway? What's the motivation for Gateway? In my mind, there's always been like two kind of a confluence of two reasons that we're sort of building Gateway. One is sort of like the V3 version of the Compound protocol, and going back a little bit to sort of last summer, at the end of last summer, so at the beginning of last summer, we began distributing our governance token on Ethereum, and we experienced like the summer of DeFi and what that explosion was like, and there was a real feeling of product market fit. The protocol went from like growing sort of 10x per year to growing like 100x per year. So like basically from like moving from like 20 million in assets to 200 million in assets in year one of its life, the protocol, and then like from like 200 to 20 billion sort of beginning with last summer. And I think what became pretty clear, at least, but if it wasn't already clear, was that Ethereum was kind of like unusable for the average person at that time. Like gas costs were getting extremely volatile and mostly just expensive, and still are. The network was congested, and we had started to think about like scaling, how to scale Compound beyond the boundaries of Ethereum and sort of reach like a broader set of users, and so that part of Gateway is certainly thinking about how to scale Compound and not like be constrained by the underlying network. At that time, we sort of took a look around at the next generation of blockchains, L1s, L2s, sidechains, rollups, all things, and like what became clear and it was that it was still going to take some time to see how things would actually play out, but we knew that we wanted to build a V3 that sort of would work for users no matter like which technologies that they were experimenting with, and we sort of concluded that having a chain would like ultimately let the Compound governance have like more control over the economics of the protocol, and also would be a way to keep fees low in the long term. And the promise of there was this promise of Polkadot, which was that with Substrate you could build a chain which was targeted to either run as like a standalone chain or as a parachain. And the idea with this constrained parachain is that it's more constrained, but you don't have to worry about the security of the validators. You're sharing the securities with the other parachain. You're sharing the security of the relay chain with the other parachain, and the validators and the consensus layer are shared. And so you really need to only worry about the availability of being able to process transactions and not and having servers available to process transactions, and not whether they're executing things faithfully or reliably. The problem was that I guess Polkadot was has still yet to launch parachains on mainnet, and like this whole time we've been working on Gateway, has been in active development itself. But we also the idea was to sort of take the lessons from the past 2.5 years, get rid of the constraint coming from the underlying network, and build a protocol that was sort of streamlined and to focus on like our specific application or what we consider it to be. And I guess before continuing on that, like the other part of why we're building Gateway is, in my mind, is this cash token, which I think these adjectives are pretty descriptive, so I'll just unpack them. So portable, it exists on many different chains and can be transferred between them. It's a little bit special as far as assets on Gateway is concerned. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But one way in which it's special is it's interest bearing, and it's also a unit of account. And so combining these things, the V3 protocol, it's cash token. So the hope was really to just focus on building out certain application layer and leverage a blockchain framework to help us deliver that. In reality, I think we spent a lot of time dealing with the idiosyncrasies of the framework that we're using and sort of re-architecting things a bit. But this is kind of the original thinking behind things. And yeah, I guess moving ahead, get back into some of that discussion later. But so what does the architecture for Gateway actually look like? Starting with maybe like more of like an end user point of view. Like so the vision for Gateway is actually fairly simple. In this simple diagram, you can see like the stars on these representations of like connected chains to Gateway. So you have a chain for Gateway, and then you have like other chains which are connected through their star ports. So in this example, like Ethereum and Tezos. And the idea is that the star ports are the main point of contact between Gateway and these other chains. There's something like a smart contract on each chain, and whatever the analogous concept is of a smart contract on that chain. And Gateway has like a superset of all the addresses which exist on all the connected chains. And so you could transfer between an Ethereum user and a Tezos user by maybe for example, you could upload ETH on Ethereum, so you lock Ethereum in the Ethereum star port. That emits an event and becomes part of Gateway. And now that the user on Ethereum can borrow, they could send the ETH to the Tezos address, but then they wouldn't be able to extract ETH to a Tezos address because the ETH asset itself wouldn't exist on Tezos, and we don't have any kind of wrapping of assets at this time. So the easiest thing to do is like you can borrow cash against the ETH on Tezos. So from the user point of view, all they have to do is like lock the ETH, and then they can transfer cash, which automatically borrows against their ETH, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second too. But from the Tezos point of view, you basically talk to Gateway and say, I want to extract this cash that I've received, and you get a notice that you take to Tezos that lets you actually pull the cash out of the starport on the Tezos side. And there's a few, from like the architecture point of view, there's maybe a few things to note here. So first of all, there's a few protocol actions. It's pretty small surface area as far as the protocol is concerned. What's not shown here maybe is like there's also a mechanism to synchronize so because this cash token exists on these different chains, and because it's interest bearing, there's an interest rate, and there is a mechanism to synchronize the rates between the chains. But overall, pretty simple mechanisms. And then like once assets are inside Gateway or uploaded to the start ports, it becomes a lot like a typical smart contract on another chain, where things become a lot easier. You're sort of working with assets that are all in one place. Maybe the harder part, not shown here, is like how we ingest this data and emit these notices. But get a little bit more into that as well. Yeah, so like talking a little bit about what the surface area of the protocol looks like. So I mentioned there's only a few functions. There's the functions which exist are basically lock, so upload, lock, which is basically lock, transfer, extract, which is basically download, and liquidate. If you're familiar with the V2 protocol, these are very similar. What you'll notice though is that there's no borrowing and repaying or supplying and withdrawing. Borrowing is actually now a state and not an action, and this is because of another improvement we made, which is to, instead of having two signed balances or two unsigned balances, which are the supply and borrow for a user, like in the V2 protocol, we don't even have the ability to represent sort of undesirable states anymore, where you're borrowing the same asset and resupplying it, which was never really is something that people do, but doesn't necessarily make sense for the protocol. So basically make that state, those states now unrepresentable, and borrowing becomes a state where you have a negative balance instead of being a separate action with a separate balance associated with it. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool because you can do things just like upload ETH and then transfer, and when you try to transfer your balances, so you could upload ETH and then transfer cash, like in the previous example. And if your cash balance happens to go negative, that's fine as long as you have enough collateral to cover it. It's just automatically borrowing cash from the protocol. And by the way, cash is created by borrowing it from the protocol. I guess the other things to note here are that we also, as compared to the V2 protocol, sort of upgraded the risk engine. In the V2 protocol, there's collateral factors which apply to like one side of a balance equation on the collateral side. We're currently using now factors on both sides, so adjusting borrow balances by these calling them volatility factors now, and using them on both sides. But it's something to help with the idea is to help with the capital efficiency of the system, and representing risks more in a little bit finer grained way. But yeah, I mean, I guess the larger idea is with the gateway is also to be able to do things like upgrade the risk engine now completely, and do more sophisticated things that we weren't necessarily able to do inside the comptroller contract on Ethereum. But yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing to notice is that there's like a change to liquidation as compared to the V2 protocol. So in the V2 protocol, liquidators always repay debt, and then they basically repay borrow and then seize some collateral. In Gateway, liquidators can basically transfer debt, so they can assume the debt of the borrower without having to necessarily repay it. And this is kind of an improvement, and we introduced it because Gateway is a separate chain now, and having to repay or supply an asset before liquidating would be an extra step. And in general, we've always tried to keep the liquidation system in Compound, with pretty like quick turnaround. We think that speed is sort of a big advantage when it comes to liquidations, and so removing the requirement to upload collateral first in order to be able to liquidate somebody sort of opens up the set of possible liquidators that can perform the liquidation, and doesn't really hurt the protocol. So it's kind of a nice feature, I think, of Gateway, that we changed liquidations in this way. talking about cash a little bit more. So I mentioned that it was portable and interest bearing. Portability, as I said, it comes from the fact that it really exists on every chain that Gateway is connected to. It is interest bearing, so all cash in Gateway, all interest in Gateway is paid in cash or is earned in cash. And actually, it's done. Getting a little into the weeds, but unlike V2, it's cash is sort of accumulated linearly by the markets in the asset markets, and then sort of all compounding kind of happens in cash itself. Also, compounding now happens over time instead of over blocks, which is a slight difference from V2. But it kind of it's just to think about what that means a little bit. It's kind of nice for something like an NFT market or something where you can't necessarily pay interest in the underlying because you can't. Maybe there's only one token which constitutes the underlying. But you always have an asset which you can pay and earn interest in. Just a little about cash, and then starting to get into more of zooming in on the architecture and some of the different components in the system, and how they start to fit together. And we'll sort of zoom in on how these fit together more as we go here. But from the high level, 10,000 feet, there's really just a few entities, so maybe like 3 layers and like 4 entities. So like the runtime layer, which is sort of the state of Gateway, which is basically the state of the chain, and it's what gets executed on in Substrate, which is the framework we're using for building the blockchain. It's really the authoritative state of the chain, and then we have the Oracle layer, which you can think is composed of both these oracles and archivists, which the archivists just make. It's like the archivist has an untrusted role, which the oracles are. Starting with the oracles are really the trusted role. They have keys, which in aggregate can be used to sign data going either to the runtime or to the starports. So either events coming from the starports to the runtime, they can sign the block metadata and the events, and those are persisted by the archivist and made available to the runtime. And vice versa for signing notices coming from the runtime, which are then posted to the starports. So like very high level view of what the information flow in between these high level components in Gateway looks like. Zooming in a little bit, you start to see like more exactly what the interfaces between some of these components are. I think this is actually a fairly precise diagram, so you can get a pretty good idea of really how information moves in Gateway looking at it. But so runtime also has things like prices, and it can accept requests coming from end users, and the oracles fetch notices from the runtime by a number. There's a lot more details to get into here, but essentially this is the things that can be done in Gateway. And then zooming in even more to sort of like the exact or like the implementation in Substrate. So Substrate is organized around these modules called palettes. Palettes are sort of individual modules within a Substrate blockchain, which can have associated state and events and errors and extrinsics, which they call them, which are basically functions you can call. And what this is, first column is showing like which functions are in which palette. And so there's like a gov palette, which has sort of like a pseudo function which can people can propose and vote to call other functions in the chain, basically through the gov palette. Then most of the functionality is in the cache palette. Actually, in the first version of Gateway, all functionality was in the cache palette, and then over the summer we started to re-architect things, mainly to separate to deal with some security concerns we had, and separating the functionality of the oracles and really isolating them, and also being able to more well define these boundaries between pieces of the system. So we had, as I was saying, we had everything in the cache palette, and things were pretty tightly coupled, and it was getting already pretty hard to make changes. So another goal besides the security of separating oracles of the refactoring was to make the dependency graph clear and not have things depending back into substrate, and have these clean boundaries between things. But yeah, I think what you can see from this diagram is, well, what you can do in cache. So it has the ability to ingest blocks and execute requests coming from the users. The users can do things like extract, liquidate, and transfer to get a sense of what the notices are. The extract notices are what's brought to the Starport in order to actually extract assets from Gateway. We give support the ability to change supply caps on the Starports, because Gateway has supply caps, which are implemented both at the Starport and in the Gateway runtime. And then change future yield as part of that interest rate syncing mechanism I was talking about. Also the ability to change oracles, the set of oracles happens through the runtime. And finally, the ability to add and upgrade a Starport. So there's a function to add a Starport, and then there's also a notice to support upgrading them once they're added. And then finally, I guess we have there's another palette, which is the prices palette, which supports posting prices using the open Oracle format that Compound had previously defined, which the V2 protocol was previously using, but not exactly using anymore. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a better idea of maybe the implementation of things. And there's obviously a lot more that could be said about that too, but it's moving ahead quickly. I think so. Like I guess the roadmap and as far as the timeline are concerned. So, obviously the Gateway is an ambitious and challenging project. We knew that much coming into it. I think we still believe it's like what we believe in the future of DeFi for sure. And like I think most of the innovation that is going to happen in this space is still yet to come. And the goal is really to build a robust platform, like a long-term foundation that's like economically reliable, and which Compound and governance and the community can build upon, as like a real engine of like growth for innovation to happen on. And so what I can say about the roadmap is like we're basically safety first. We're not rushing the QA process. We've already as I was saying, over the summer took a few steps back to re-architect some things and get more comfortable with security profile, and we'll continue doing that. Obviously, I think the products and the features are quite well defined, but we're in this process now of implementing things really carefully, and I'm not prepared to put a date on when we'll be done with that process, but it will continue making steady progress on it. I guess the other thing to mention is that Gateway is not the only thing that we're working on at Compound, so we do have a lot of other exciting projects. I guess it's a good problem to have, but fortunately, some of those projects are growing more rapidly than we anticipated, and we're still a small team. So if Gateway is interesting to you, or other things that Compound works on are interesting to you, especially, we're hiring engineers. We're also hiring in other parts of the company. So, please get in touch if you're interested in learning more about that. And yeah, I guess the other thing to maybe mention and keep in mind about the roadmap is Hofstadter's law has certainly come into play and probably continue to come into play. And I guess if you're not familiar with that, it's basically the recursive law that says that things always take longer than you think they're going to take, especially when you take into account Hofstadter's law. I guess finally, I'm sure, I think a lot of information moved pretty quickly. If you have any questions about Gateway or about anything else related to Compound, you can always find me and others in the Discord and also on the forum on comp.xyz. Or also I'm on Twitter. If I can be helpful for anything, feel free to reach out. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. I think we're about out of time, so I'll wrap up here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jared. And that was a really good and deep overview of how everything is structured and is working on Gateway. We are out of time, but I'll ask one question just before we move on to our last talk. How does composability work in this world? And what does that look like? And how should people think about that?
Yeah, great question. I think, a lot of it is still unknown. Like a lot of it remains to be seen. But one of the ideas with Cash Token as well was to be for that to be one of the composable pieces. And we can think about Cash Token as like maybe the tip of V3, and so like Cash Token itself can be like embedded inside. It's a part of V3, but it can be embedded, for instance, inside of like V2 as like a Z token, or there could be a market. So there's lots of interesting things you can do with the Cash Token. There is the ability also to initiate TRX, what we call TRX requests, which are sort of the requests that users can initiate. They can send them either directly to Gateway, or they can submit them through the Starport and have them, through a contract or something, and have them executed on Gateway chain. So we think there's a lot of interesting things to do. There are, unlike the V2 protocol and everything happening on Ethereum, it is a little bit trickier, right? Like some certain things are asynchronous, and so it's not totally clear how it might affect like certain design patterns for composability that exist today. But we've tried to create opportunities for composability.
Absolutely. I think it's a very giant experiment, and just to some sense, because you have to sort of test it out and see how to evolve. So it's very exciting. Everybody who found this interesting, obviously you can check out the links Jared posted on how to see more about what's happening with Gateway. And thanks again for the presentation.
Thanks, Kartik. Great to be here. Look forward to the rest of the conference.
Sounds perfect. So with that, we are ready for our last talk of the day, and I'm super excited to welcome Robert Lesner, founder and CEO of Compound. We're going to do an AMA segment here, and we sourced a lot of questions from the broader ETH Global and Compound ecosystem. So I'll just go rapid fire into this, and hopefully we have enough to talk about for 30 to 40 minutes. If not, we'll talk about whatever Robert wants to talk about. So we'll start with something easy. Robert, I've known you for a few years. We've seen so much happen in DeFi. My first question is, 3 years ago, when you originally thought Compound would be and what it is now, is that exactly what you thought in a good way? What is like the expectation versus reality? Could you do sort of a comparison and contrast how that world was then and now?
Yeah. So first off, I'm excited to be here speaking with you all today. 3 years ago, when we launched Compound, it was, August 2018, I think is when the first version of Compound was launched. It was after a year of building in solitude, in the upstairs attic above an advertising agency. And we didn't know what to expect. There was very few things that looked or worked like DeFi applications at this time. The phrase DeFi would sort of like be invented like around the same time that Compound launched, not by Compound, but by other folks in the community. It was a very early time. And what we were telling ourselves at the time was that it would take potentially 5 to 10 years before there would be any meaningful traction in DeFi. At the time, there were some very early experiments in DEXs, from Token Trader to Ether Delta to 0x, later to Uniswap. But at the time, there was just like these very primitive examples of people trying to use smart contracts to create, financial tools that sort of just ran on their own, right? And so our genuine expectation was it was going to be 5 to 10 years. One, because it would take 5 to 10 years for assets from the real world to start to come into crypto, besides just like crypto natively issued tokens. We thought that, the user experience was, extremely clunky, and version 1 of Compound was so hilariously clunky. And we just thought it would take forever. And I think things evolved a lot faster than we expected. The white paper for Compound at the time was like, here's this system. And eventually, to us, actually, we thought it was 5, 10 years. Eventually, it will be run by a DAO, because even then, the term for anything like, smart contract managed was DAO, right? And we said, eventually this will be run by a DAO. We thought it was going to be years. The pace at which things unfolded was actually much faster than I or anybody in the community or anybody outside of crypto, or really anyone inside of crypto. And that includes like the most passionate believers. It all occurred faster than anyone would have anticipated. By the end of 2018, Compound had like $20 million of assets in it. It was like number 2 behind MakerDAO, which I think there was like $50 million of assets in MakerDAO at the time. I mean, 2019, I think, was actually a really big year for DeFi, because really of the growth and, adoption of stablecoins. Stablecoins really weren't that popular in 2018. There were some very early examples of them, but 2019 saw, Tether on Ethereum. It saw USD coin. It saw the growth of DAI. It was still called Psi at the time, and all of these stablecoins. And this was like this sort of missing ingredient that turbocharged DeFi in my mind. Suddenly, applications like Compound started to make a lot of sense to people. No one really wanted to borrow Ether. They really wanted to borrow stablecoins. People didn't necessarily want to trade an arbitrary token. They wanted to trade, a stablecoin for crypto, or trade a crypto for stablecoins. It just enabled the whole ecosystem to grow rapidly. And so everything started moving at a speed faster than we anticipated. And that actually encouraged us to take what we thought was going to be a 5-year journey and condense its time frame and move the governance of Compound to a DAO, or the community, and decentralize the protocol. And I actually think, the thing that eclipsed our thinking was, how fast we would be able to hand over controls. A lot of the steps that went into this process, Compound created or designed, and are now becoming like the staples of, DeFi, but like, having a time lock contract. We wrote a time lock that's now like, used in hundreds of projects. We wrote a governance system and, voting token, which are used in hundreds of projects. And, all these things we had to discover for ourselves and just continuously try to, not just innovate on the core protocol, but the tools by which, the community could use to run the protocol. And so, I didn't think by this point we would have a decentralized protocol. When we launched Compound, it was running on admin keys. And now it's pretty much anything but. It's a community run and decentralized protocol. And it happened a lot faster than I would have guessed.
Oh, this is incredible. Unknowingly, you've set the stage for all the other questions I had, because you touched on every single topic I have a big question on. So we'll go deeper into everything. So no, this is incredible. I think it still blows my mind that I remember last February, or actually, early February, I was like, wait, DeFi just crossed $1 billion in TVL, and that feels like forever, but it was not even 18 months ago. and
yeah, the space moves so fast. We couldn't imagine when Maker crossed 100 million in ETH deposits, and that's still not 2 years ago, I think. But it's great. You already set the stage here, so I think one of the super interesting things here is that you
essentially were one of the super cutting edge, but also high profile projects to introduce things like liquidity mining and governance and just all these growth tactics. In my opinion, it's a little bit challenging because you are the first ones to do this thing and find out if it's working or not. So you're just in a super interesting position, which is good and bad at the same time. But kind of knowing everything now in hindsight, anywhere from new things we've invented to learnings from trying all those things out in iterations. If you were to launch Compound again now, what would you do something differently?
I would do a lot differently. And, you know, a lot of things that we did at the time were being done for the first time. We had to make some educated guesses. And even in the educated guesses, you know, it was impossible to predict whether we were going to be right, wrong, too conservative, too aggressive, or what. You know, the idea of, you know, handing over the protocol to the community without like a gatekeeper was considered like an absolutely radical idea. At the time, there was a few other examples of decentralized governance, but they were very early still. MakerDAO was a good example. But people thought it was crazy that, you know, there wasn't going to be a foundation, you know, directly managing a protocol. You know, a lot of the investors in Compound Labs thought it was crazy that we would give away half the tokens. Up until this point, there was really no project that was giving away tokens at all. They were selling tokens, right? And, you know, everyone thought that 50% of the tokens being given away was like an insane thing. And, you know, the mechanics by which we like, you know, decided to actually roll out governance was also extremely experimental. People forget, but Compound governance and the voting contracts and the voting system was actually tested live for 3 months with like a limited token holder group before being rolled out to the entire community, which is something that I actually haven't seen since. People go from zero to like, you know, full on-chain governance, you know, sometimes. Oftentimes the intermediate steps are like there's snapshots or there's, you know, a team that's vaguely in control and enforcing the community's will. But, you know, we basically went from, you know, centralized to decentralized, but the intermediate step was not like some intermediate governance solution. It was just allowing a limited stakeholder group to use the full, you know, on-chain tools.
Hacky staging environment.
Exactly. And, you know, if we could do it all differently, you know, there's a couple things that have emerged as like standards in the communities, not just of Compound, but in crypto and in DeFi generally, that I think we would have like adopted, but they just didn't really exist yet. So one is, you know, I would say, you know, distributing tokens to historical users. You know, when we started distributing tokens to users, it was to all present and future users. It wasn't historical looking. I actually think the way Uniswap handled it was phenomenal. It's probably too late to go back and revise this, but, you know, if I could go back to the beginning of 2020, we would have changed how we allocated tokens between, you know, future users and present users and historical users. That's the first thing that I think would have changed. The second is that I think there should, you know, if I could do it all over again, I think there should have been, you know, generally more for developers. It's, you know, very easy to focus on users, but I actually think the most important part of the protocol in a lot of ways are developers. And I think that, like, you know, coming up with some method of allocating tokens specifically for projects built on top of Compound or developers building on top of Compound would have been really valuable. It's also, you know, hard to go back and change that, but I actually think the community can potentially start to like recalibrate and focus more on, you know, the developer side of things as opposed to just raw users of the protocol itself.
There's nuance from like are you sort of differentiating another category between like a grants program equivalent, or kind of what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think the way it gets developed and expresses itself, you know, now is something like a grants program, right, where you can allocate to developers. But I also think in terms of, you know, allocating, you know, tokens and governance rights to just applications, I think it'd be more interesting, you know, to look at not just how do you distribute governance to, you know, stakeholders that are building, but also applications built on top of the protocol. You know, at the end of the day, you know, what we wanted and didn't see play out as closely as, you know, I would have hoped would have been, you know, tokens going to like custodians and like things like that that are directly integrating the protocol. if I could revise it, I think we would have changed, the actual logic a little bit, but building a system for the first time is incredibly difficult, and it's hard to plan for all these outcomes. And I think what we also could have done is, if I could go back in time, it would have been, setting up things like, a grants committee sooner, as opposed to letting it sort of like slowly develop over time. Again, when we created, Comp and when we distributed it to users, these weren't really concepts yet. But now these are concepts, so if I could go back in time, to the day that Comp was released, I think we would have, had in place, some allocation of tokens overseen by the community, not through the protocol and the user, usage of it, but like to be distributed by users to other builders, to other participants, to other stakeholders.
Absolutely. I think if I'm parsing this right, like I think a lot of this is about tightening the feedback loops, the way I see it, because you get to understand and iterate much faster. And I think that's an excellent sort of framing as well. On something you just mentioned, obviously, being the first one to try things out is challenging, but what did you kind of think would happen for liquidity mining when you introduced it, and anyone from concerns to what you would change now, and specifically around that?
Yeah, it's funny because at the time, it wasn't really called liquidity mining, and internally, like, we didn't think of it like as like liquidity mining. We just thought of it as, hey, this is like the coolest thing we can do to like bring users into the fold, right? And we thought, well, the product is great. What if we make it even greater by like, giving Comp to all the users? Like, people love Compound today, they'll extra love Compound, if we just give them the tokens. And we didn't really know what was going to happen. There was a couple other, similar approaches that other, ecosystem participants had done in the past. I thought, as we were designing it, we had been able to observe synthetics and some of the approaches they were taking. So, people say Compound invented liquidity mining. I don't really agree. But I do think, we came up with a way of distributing liquid tokens to users for using the protocol directly, as opposed to incentivizing some liquidity pool, right? Or like some, Uniswap pool or whatever, right? We also saw exchanges that have been doing, there was a long time ago, there was a concept called trans fee mining that was like popular for like 3 months before like the exchanges that like pioneered it like imploded horribly. But like, what they did is they would give tokens to users based on how much trading volume they had. And this was actually bad because it led to a lot of like wash trading and like just like useless activity. And what we wanted to avoid was people like, entering into useless activity. And we tried to design a system that would just reward users, not like arbitrary things. And it was hard to get it exactly right. I think, if anyone on this call remembers the first couple of weeks of the Comp distribution, the first couple of weeks were chaotic because it was like first of its kind. Changes to it had to go through governance, which was like a little bit slow. And the incentives were crazy. So like certain markets wound up being like hilariously used when like they didn't serve as much of like a legitimate underlying economic purpose as people expected. Like the BAT market, if anyone remembers, was like the #1 market on Compound. And everybody like on the internet and Twitter was like, why is BAT so large? And it's just because the algorithm that was used, just led in this like unexpected consequence to like BAT being the #1 market in Compound. And people were scrambling to like find BAT, take it off exchanges, move it into Compound. It was like such a bizarre situation.
Yeah, I remember all those things. Yep, it was chaotic. One last kind of question on this. You sort of mentioned that a lot of people started using a lot of the things that you came up with as part of the launch, and anywhere from contracts on how to manage governance to just liquidity mining stuff. Was it sort of did you take that as like a super good thing when everybody started using it? You have hundreds of projects, or was that worrying? How do you connect?
I take it as a super good thing. Like one of the best virtues of, Ethereum and DeFi on Ethereum, and this applies to other blockchains as well, but one of the strongest virtues I find is that, every project increases the network effect of the entire ecosystem. And, if Compound can build a contract that other people can use, great, right? If projects don't have to reinvent the wheel, and they can use like the compound time lock code or like the comp token code or the comp governance system code. Great. It means there's more things happening on Ethereum for everybody, and everyone's going to benefit from it, whether it's compound directly or compound indirectly. Like the more people that are able to ship things faster, it just benefits the entire ecosystem. When we started, there was almost no code that we could use off the shelf, right? There was almost nothing that we could like refer to in terms of like how to like build out an application like Compound. We had to like truly discover and innovate a lot of the most basic, concepts. Like Compound pioneered peer to like pool liquidity. Like this didn't like really exist yet.
On-chain interest rates, like
yeah, and like how to like compute interest rates for an infinite quantity of users with one computation instead of iterating over a list of them. Like very basic things we had to like discover for ourselves. And now, like if we wanted to write Compound or we wanted to like make a new version, like it wouldn't take the year that it took the first time, right? It's not that like we got smarter, it's that there's more things available now. Like you don't have to like roll your own everything. You can like focus on building a core application and like, use certain contracts off the shelf or in lightly modified ways. And so the fact that like people don't have to build out their own governance tools, I think is unbelievably valuable for everyone because you get like a more decentralized ecosystem. The fact that people don't have to like, do the R&D to like discover basic concepts and they can just copy pieces from Compound is great, right? So I think in a lot of ways, whether it's noticed or unnoticed, the more people that are using, pieces of the Compound ecosystem, it's like, a silent victory. And I think the people that do notice, it's even better.
Would you then say that it's usually not a good thing to be a first mover in this space because you don't have to figure a lot of this out? Or
it's definitely harder to be a first mover. And what's really funny is when we were designing the Compound governance system, like the way that the token works, the way you can delegate votes, the way you actually vote on proposals, like the way the system like mechanically operates. When we were designing it, we would always say like we have a second mover advantage. Because like discovering it for the first time would be like so hard. We got to like look at MakerDAO. We got to look at like, like other things that have been built. We had to, we had an opportunity to look at like Tezos, the blockchain, and how they were doing like governance of their blockchain. Like we had a second mover advantage, and I think it allowed us to spend less time building a better system. If we had to discover all this stuff for the first time and we had nothing to compare it to, it would have been really, really, really hard. And so like I give a lot of kudos to the teams that had to be the first mover on even designing governance.
Absolutely. Let's see. So I think a lot of projects right now are very focused on getting more and more people involved as they think about anywhere from increasing their users to their community. How did you initially bootstrap the Compound ecosystem in the community, and what advice would you give right now to projects that are trying to spar a community?
Yeah, so I think there's things that we did well. I think there's things we didn't do phenomenally well. I think the first thing that's actually important is the ability to delegate votes was built natively into the comp token and the governance system. I actually think this is really important because sometimes the most active participants and the loudest voices aren't the wealthiest users, right? And like what you want is a system where just anyone who's like active and wants to contribute has the opportunity to have like a loud say in the direction of the protocol, even if they're like new or young or entering crypto for the first time, right? Like it leads to more of a meritocracy. So I think, the way we built the comp token and the delegation system was actually like a really strong tool to get like a couple like really active participants involved in the community. The things that we didn't do well is it's now been like over a year, a little more than a year since comp was released. And like, I feel like it's taken a long time for the community to start to organize around having a grants committee, having a process to like directly reward contributors. Like we weren't able to foresee the importance of that. And, it led to there being like a delay before I think a lot of people could like start to get involved. And compound governance is starting to like very rapidly evolve and flourish. And I think we're starting to see more and more participants coming in. And, I think that, one of the things that we could have done better originally, and I think that other projects can learn from, is just having like a solid, foundation to be able to talk to contributors, reward them, make them a part of the process. And it didn't start off with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think the second falls into the first one to figure this out, so others then can copy and be like, oh, we should change this thing when we do it ourselves. Changing gears a little bit, last week, an exploit was discovered on Compound. Could you tell us kind of what happened and sort of how do you kind of think about making sure that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so this goes to what I think is like truly the biggest opportunity of an open and decentralized protocol, and also the biggest risk. But like, I'd like to start with the biggest opportunity. So the biggest opportunity is that anyone can become a core contributor to the Compound protocol. There's no obstacles, there's no roadblocks. Anyone listening right now can become a core contributor. You don't have to be a member of Compound Labs. And it's an open development process with a group of community members that's excited to welcome new developers into the process. And it means that people can work on code at the heart of Compound. And so, there was a bug that came from an amazing, contribution from a great contributor who was looking to upgrade one of the features of Compound. This upgrade was reviewed by lots of the community members. It was reviewed by members of Compound Labs. It was like what I actually think of as one of like the most virtuous benefits of decentralization is that you could have a community member being a core contributor, adding and improving like core functionality of the protocol, making it better. The biggest risk is that there is a bug, right? And in proposal 62, there was a bug. It happened, right? Luckily, there was no user funds that were lost. What was lost was comp that was reserved for future users. So in a lot of ways, it was like a bank error in the favor of, in some cases, like very randomly selected addresses. And, it was the first time that there was really like a smart contract bug that led to a loss of funds in Compound history. And this is a massive disappointment. Now, this one proposal 62, shows the opportunity and it shows the risk of distributed governance and distributed development. And it shows how distributed development is different than centralized development, where there's like one core team that like writes all the code and then people can vote on it. Like Compound goes all the way and it's decentralized development. And so there's nothing better than Prop 62 to sort of like embody this. I think it's going to be a catalyst for change within the community and within the decentralized development process, because I think it's going to lead to a little bit more conservatism in a good way, where there's going to be, more participants, more review, more analysis, and it's going to lead to a much stronger decentralized development process. But Compound's also one of the first projects that like really, develops in this fashion. Most projects, even when they have decentralized voting control, they have centralized development. There's obviously some incredible examples to learn from. Like Bitcoin, is, an open development process. Like anyone can become a contributor to it, right? And I think Compound is headed in that way, where you're going to have an open source code developed by a community, not, a permission team, right? And that's the direction it's heading. And I actually think that 62 is an amazing wake-up call because it was a disaster. I mean, frankly, like it's a disaster, right? It led to a loss so far of, about 220,000 comp is missing, right? But it didn't lose user funds, and no one in the community is going to forget this. It's going to change the way that development occurs. It's going to, I think, clarify the minds of all of the contributors. And I think long-term, it's going to lead to a lot of improvements in the protocol. There were bugs in Bitcoin, right? That's a fact, right? This was a bug in Compound, but if the community handles it correctly, it'll be the last bug in Compound.
No, I think that's a very optimistic and a good note. As a summary, I think this is super interesting. What I guess on the same theme, you are the CEO of Compound Labs, but a minority token holder of the Compound protocol. how do you kind of see your role in this ecosystem and for the protocol, and sort of what do you think that looks like compared to what the community expects of you as well?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because, I think there's more of a desire to have a figurehead than there is, than there should be, right? Like, I'm not actually special. Like, pretty much anyone listening to this call could play almost as large of a role in the Compound protocol that I play. What I have is years of, experience and, a history with the protocol and a passion for it. But, I think in order for a protocol like Compound to succeed, like, it has to be taken up by the community. They have to take it over. Like, Satoshi's not here to guide Bitcoin, right? And I think Bitcoin is stronger because of it, right? If you had, a single figurehead that was like in charge, I think you get a worse outcome. And so, I think, I'm trying to make my role more and more of like a cheerleader and somebody who knows how the system works, but someone who like very genuinely wants the community to take over as much as possible.
Yeah, and I don't mean this in any negative or bad way, but it's just interesting to see when sometimes the crowd goes against what you're interested in if you're voting on something, and like that in a way is a true way of showcasing that this is working as expected.
Yeah, I've lost a couple votes like in Compound governance history, and that's great.
It's a great sign. Moving on to sort of looking at the growth of the ecosystem. If you were a developer and if somebody comes to you and says, I want to contribute to the Compound protocol, I guess, what do you think is important over the next couple of years for the way you think the community or the feature should go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's really like 4 buckets of work that are needed in my mind. So one is, building out the core protocol itself, adding features, right? Adding like new code, adding modifications. We're starting to see a community, set of developers really start to like gain this as a skill set. Like a year ago, there was 1 or 2 developers that were like contributing to the core code. We're getting more and more contributors to the core code. And that's really exciting. And I think like we're starting to build a muscle as a community of like core contributors. The second are applications built on top of the protocol, right? There's huge opportunities for better interfaces, for taking the open source front end, forking it, improving it, adding new features, right? That I think are like underrepresented. One of the things we did a couple of weeks ago was open source and license the front end to the community and say like, hey, like take this, like go run it. Like there's a one-click deploy process to IPFS. Like, if you want to make a better version of this, like it should be what everyone uses, right? And I think like, the experimentation around the front end is like a little bit low, but I think there's really cool opportunities there. Like someone could build a front end that integrates Compound and Uniswap and does even cooler things with both of them. Or like, there's a lot of opportunity to make the core interface even better. And I think this is a little bit underserved.
Should that come from like people's own creativity, or do you think there's like a handful of things that you would like to see and you want to kind of incentivize that or broadcast that and tell people to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the creativity is the limit. Like I'm not able to think of all like the things that, a front end should be, but like I could see someone building a system that like, you can opt in to like sharing your email and like it sends you alerts when you're like, borrowing capacity is getting too dangerous. And like, it could be more useful. You can see a version that like doesn't have that, but focuses more on like DEX integrations as well. Like there's a lot there that I think is possible. And so, I think front ends are like a really underdeveloped corner of this because like there doesn't have to be one front end, right? Someone could, fix some bugs. Like Treasury and Ledger are always having issues as hardware wallets, using the interface. Like there's so much to do that could be improved upon. So that's the second. The third is that I actually think there's a big opportunity in the community to spend more time thinking about the sort of parameters of the protocol, right? Not like what is the code and how does it work, but like, what should the liquidation variables be? What should the collateral variables be, right? Why, right? Gauntlet has recently come in and started spending more time on this, but like there's big opportunities to think through the interest rate models and like the economic efficiency of these markets, things that are still run by humans, but that are like always looking for active contributors and thinkers. So if you're someone who's not technically inclined, but you are, economically or mathematically inclined, I think there's huge opportunities to like focus on the parameters of the protocol. And lastly, it's new projects. Like new projects are, this is a very vague and open-ended, category, but it's, could there be a version of the compound protocol, specifically meant for being deployed to like rollups, right? Or that could work with like other things. Like, can the compound community deploy the code elsewhere? Like, the sky's the limit, but I think like, there's a huge opportunity for creative thinking and, for people to volunteer and say like, hey, it would be fun to have compound on, Optimism or compound on Arbitrum or compound on Solana or, whatever it is. And, basically like adapt the core code base and the open source front end to those networks. I think the grants, organization, should be able and excited to encourage this and to, incentivize, the success of this. And I think there's huge opportunities here. So, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, it can't be that hard to like, deploy compound on, Arbitrum, it's great, let's do it, right? Like as a community, like, anyone here can, help expand compound. And I think that's really exciting and really empowering.
No, it is a great message. I mean, I do have a couple of things left, but they're all on the same theme before we kind of wrap today up. I think one of the most interesting things today, as we looked at all the talks, has been how much variety and sort of diversity there is on the types of projects that have been funded by the ecosystem. Some of them are just services that help you manage what your compound positions are, to better interfaces, to more technical projects that help you improve the design and even parameter tweaking and managing risk. It is such a big ecosystem that you can contribute in so many different ways. And one common questions a common theme and common set of questions we've gone for every of these talks has been, how do I contribute if I'm not a developer? Or do I have to be really specifically like, perfect on understanding Solidity or one of the other skill sets? Is it really kind of how you're thinking about the growth of the ecosystem? Do you want to prioritize developers right now before you move on to other sort of types of skills? Or what does that look like as you think about it from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would describe Compound as, very professional and boring anarchy. And, there's an opportunity for anyone with any skill set to come in and just start participating, right? Anyone could come in and just like, sort of like, there's no protocol job applications, so to speak. But if anyone's interested in like working like with a core DeFi protocol, there's a million opportunities for anyone with an idea on how they want to contribute. It's like, there's opportunities to help like come in as like a community like organizer and like, organize like the development processes, the community calls. There's roles for people to come in and spend more time on the economics of the protocol. There's opportunities for folks to focus on protocol business development or focus on marketing or focus on integrations. Like, whatever your skill set is, like if you just come into the community, you're really excited, you just raise your hand and you say, here's what I'm going to do. How do I do this? I think there's going to be a lot of support for it. And so there's very few people that tell you no, or that want to tell you no. There's not a lot of structure in a good way. I mean, it's decentralized protocol, but whatever your skill set, like there's probably something for you.
That's perfect. So hopefully the couple of questions we got today, just right now, definitely address this. One sort of related, but a side conversation I want to have is, I think one interesting problem right now in this market is that the incentive to start something new is far greater than contributing to something existing. How do you think about balancing that, or do you have any advice for people on when they have this choice? What should they think about, long-term versus short-term, and anything around it?
Yeah, that's a great question. In a environment like this, systems like Compound that have been around for years, are incredibly exciting for certain reasons, but they're not as new as something that you can create from scratch. I think long-term, simple, protocols like Compound are extremely important, but I understand the sort of like goals of like starting something from scratch. The advantages to working in a protocol like Compound are that, it's operating today. There's tens of billions of dollars in it. It's already at scale. There's a huge global user base, and you can have a huge impact in a way that you don't have to, take a risk on something that doesn't exist yet. But I'm someone who started Compound, from scratch, and so I understand the idea of entrepreneurship as well. But the skills that you build at Compound are also, the skills that are necessary to create a new protocol. And oftentimes I think, being a meaningful contributor to a protocol like Compound helps you on whatever journey you want to go on next. And so in a way you can have both.
Yeah, if anything, this could also be a way to sort of get experience understanding how to manage things at scale and use that to learn and see what you can improve or change.
Exactly.
No, that's a really good way of thinking about it. Last question, and I feel like you've answered this in certain ways, but I want to get us a few more specific details here. For everybody that's kind of interested in contributing to Compound right now, what is kind of your wish list of things that are super interesting to you that you think the Compound ecosystem needs, and what is the process of becoming a contributor to the protocol?
Yeah, so to get involved, you can go to comp.xyz and join the Discord. That's where a lot of the conversations take place between those two. And you can ask what needs to be built, but I think there's a lot of room to spend more time talking about things that haven't been looked at in years, like the interest rate models. Right? These are massively important, move billions of dollars, but no one's really looked at what the interest rate model should be in a really long time, right? So taking a look at some of the parameters of the protocol with a very research-driven approach, I think is a good one. I think there's a large sort of development wish list that you can find on compoundgrants.org, through RFPs and projects that are in the works. If there's things that look interesting and haven't been worked on, great opportunity. I think, focusing on the, interface areas, we just open source the interface, I'll double back to this, there's a lot of opportunities to make the interface better. When we launched it in 2019, it was the greatest interface that Web3 had ever seen, but that was 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And the interface really has been pretty much the exact same since, and a lot has changed. I think, forking the interface and improving it is a huge opportunity. There's so many features that are available. And lastly, helping to expand, Compound to new markets and in new ways, I think is extremely exciting. It's much harder and longer work, especially because it comes from. What's that?
You mean for a specific interface prioritizing a user group, or is that a product feature or protocol thing?
Yeah, in terms of the protocol, working on, gateway, we're working on deploying the code base to a roll up. There's a lot of opportunities to just expand, the access to the protocol. So that's the fourth area that I would say to look at. But it all starts with just raising your hand. There's a lot of people that are happy to talk to you. And I would say comp.xyz and Discord are really great places to come.
Amazing. I think that's a perfect note to end on. And I think if there's two takeaways here, is go to comp.xyz and get involved with the community. And for those of you who are interested in building, compoundgrants.org is the place to go to learn about how to get involved and get grants. Robert, thank you so much here. I want to thank everybody from the Compound team and the Compound Grants program. I'll do this plug one more time for all of you here. Compoundgrants.org is the place to be. You can see RFPs and apply for grants directly and get more and more involved. So with that, I want to thank everybody who tuned in today and participated. A lot of great questions, a lot of amazing projects, and a lot of links shared on how to get more pull requests on GitHub and get them to prod. So with that, I want to wish everybody a happy hacking for the rest of the hackathon. We got a few more days to go before all projects are due, and we can't wait to see what everybody builds next week. So until then, enjoy your weekend, everybody, or actually not yet. We're going to see all of you tomorrow for our Developer Tool Summit. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. Take care.